alone kings reign and princes decree justice, and from whom alone cometh all counsel, wisdom, and understanding, we thine unworthy servants here gathered today, together in thy name, do most humbly beseech thee to send down thy heavenly wisdom from above to direct and guide us in all of our consultations. And grant that we, having thy fear always before our eyes, and laying aside all private interests, prejudices, and partial affections, the result of all our counsels may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the Queen, the public weal, peace and tranquility of St. Lucia, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the fellowship of the Holy Ghost be with us all evermore. Amen. Good morning, members. I have just one announcement that I've been requested to make, and that is to wish Bernadette Thompson, also known as Dedet, from Cooley Town, who celebrated her 111th birthday. I am sure at the appropriate time, the relevant member of Parliament shall expand on that announcement. I also wish to advise that I've been informed that the member for Dennery North will again not be with us today, but he does send his best wishes and asked me to tell you that he's thinking of you. Statements by ministers. Motions, members, when we adjourned last evening, the question before this Honorable House was that the Honorable House of Assembly do adopt the report of the Standing Finance Committee on the estimates of expenditure for the financial year 2022 to 2023 in the sum of $1,842,813,200 as a charge against the Consolidated Fund and other funds of the State of St. Lucia. Deputy Prime Minister and member for Castries South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm once again pleased to address this debate as a duly elected parliamentary representative for Castries South. As usual, I give praise to the Almighty, my family, friends, my executive group, supporters, well-wishers, and all the constituents of Castries South. Mr. Speaker, the constituents of Castries South persevered and were resilient. 5 years was not 50 years, and now they are hopeful that their dreams of a better constituency and a better St. Lucia are becoming a reality. They long for a government that would put them first. They long for a prime minister that was not vindictive, that would not be telling them untruths as a matter of fact, that would not cry on demand, that would not believe that their patrimony does not matter, a prime minister that does not believe that colonialism had a conscience, and a prime minister they long for that would never call them jackasses and barking dogs. My constituents long for a government that did not encourage division and discord and was not at war with its own people. And Mr. Speaker, I have to explain to this chamber why this morning I am the one speaking first. I am sure St. Lucians would have gotten accustomed to the Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, presenting his estimates. And the rebuttal is always led by the leader of the opposition. Every St. Lucian knows that. But yesterday, we had a strange exchange. The leader of the opposition, for whatever reason, whether he has forgotten that he's no longer Prime Minister, or whether the budget was probably, the estimates were a bit too much for him, wanted to complain and to say that he thought, first of all, he needed an extra day before he can speak and respond. We had to explain to him that that was not convention, that was not the practice. It happens with the budget, the appropriation bill debate, where a day is given because the members on the other side would have been hearing it for the first time. With the estimates are in the possession of all parliamentarians for days before the debate. In our case, we gave even more days than we got when we were in opposition. There was no issue of not being familiar with the figures. And then he argued that it was customary to start at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and not 9 o'clock. And we had to point out to him historically, in 2017, 2018, 2019, we did start at 2 o'clock. But in 2021, he told us we need to behave ourselves. So he started at 9 in the morning. So we told him, based on the precedents that he had set, we were going to start at 9 in the morning. Then he argued that I did not give him the courtesy of a call to find out when it is that he wants to speak. Again, we had to explain to him, that's not how it is done. As leader of the opposition, he wants to speak at a certain time, he calls the leader of government business, and if he doesn't want to call me, I can understand why he can call the Prime Minister and say, can you accommodate me at a certain time? But it is not for me to call him to find out when he wants to speak. He is no longer Prime Minister. The representative of Mico South must understand that he is not in control of this chamber. So he has decided that he is not speaking this morning, and no one can make him speak. Truth be told, Mr. Speaker, we want a mature parliamentary debate. We want a mature discourse in this country. So we will speak, and we will start the debate, even if he doesn't want to do so, as is expected of him. But he must never take our graciousness to mean weakness. So we are going to start the debate, but I'm going to say to him, the member for Mico South, if he does not speak by a certain time this afternoon, he will lose his right to speak. He cannot expect to speak last after all of us have spoken just before the Prime Minister does his rebuttal. He cannot decide on his own volition that he will speak whenever he wants to speak in the chamber. There has to be discipline and order, understanding and compromise. There are conventions, there are practices, and he must understand that he is not in control of this chamber anymore. So we shall proceed, Mr. Speaker, but if he does not speak at a reasonable time, he will have to lose his right to speak, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, maybe in some ways the member for Miko South is a bit traumatized by the estimates. He's traumatized, Mr. Speaker, because this is the estimates with a people's agenda. And I saw yesterday, and I made sure, I observed the body language of the member for Miko South. Every time the member for Castries spoke about the people, he rolled his eyes. He tossed his head. It's almost as if the very notion of a budget being for the people of St. Lucia is offensive to him. It seems so. Why would you turn up your eyes and toss your body when we kept talking over and over about this being about the people's agenda? The people matter. It is why we are putting the people first. This member from Miko South, Mr. Speaker, if you look at the estimates of previous budgets, had the largest borrowing in the history of St. Lucia. For 5 years, almost $2 billion was borrowed in this country. Almost $2 billion was borrowed. And yet, when the member for Castries came into office, there were so many bills to pay, you wondered, where did all the borrowing go? Receivables of the government, payables, sorry, almost $175 million. That's the below the line expenses that have not been honored yet by government. The DFCs, Mr. Speaker, and this is an offense to this country. In the search for an electoral victory, many roads were built in an irresponsible manner. Almost $150 million of DFCs, 156, 186. And a DFC, Mr. Speaker, if you don't know, is where the government says to a contractor, I don't have the money, but you can go ahead and build the road at an agreed price, and I will repay you after. In this case, the member agreed to repay all those loans within a 5-year period. Imagine, Mr. Speaker, $186 million spent on roads in the lead up to elections, all in search of an electoral victory. I know some of my colleagues on this side are smiling because they got a lot of roads. They're marching up already. A lot of roads. So even the attempt to build so many roads to win the elections failed. Failed. And now we are burdened with paying almost $186 million for roads, Mr. Speaker. And I know even in my constituency, a couple had already been approved. And I've said to the Minister of Finance that they will have to be honored with all due respect, and I've begged him to do it, because what the member from Miko South did was totally unacceptable, was irresponsible, and placed this country on the brink of going over the cliff of economic collapse. But this government is a responsible government, and we are committed to getting it right, and we will get it right. And again, after my conversation with the member from Miko South, I kept asking myself, isn't he going to learn some basic things? You've lost the elections. Let's move on. I listened to the member from Miko South speak about the government spending money in a court case against him. And I'm thinking, who advises him? Mr. Speaker, there you have a prime minister who spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to get after members on this side, the member from Castries Central, the member from Denry North for the national lotteries, myself, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I have the entire list, Mr. Speaker, of all the legal bills that were supposed to be paid, some still outstanding. But he'll say that they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to get after him for just $40,000. And I laughed. In my own case, he claimed I defrauded the British government £5,000. And I can recall, Mr. Speaker, police officers being sent up to England on 2 occasions. Scotland Yard being asked to investigate me at the taxpayers' expenses. they travel business to England, and I know COVID caught them in England. They had to spend extra days in England in a hotel because they could not travel. He forgets that. He forgets that. I had to read documents he wrote to the US government to ask Gmail to release all my emails so they can read my emails. He forgot he did this. He forgot he did this. And then listen to him. He went to his Attorney General and said, we're not spending any more money on that case against him. Mr. Speaker, can you have a word with the member from Castries South? Mr. Speaker, I mean, how do you say that you were Prime Minister, that you directed the Attorney General not to spend money on a case against yourself? How did you even become Prime Minister of St. Lucia with that level of thinking, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker.
Members, let's not get personal. I think I've been very lenient in the crosstalk. If it is that is going to descend to that level, I will stop it altogether.
Mr. Speaker, again, I will later on speak about the GIS, Mr. Speaker. The member from Castries South would speak about the vindictiveness of the Prime Minister and myself and firing people, Mr. Speaker. Vindictiveness, Mr. Speaker? You walk into my office right now, the person assigned to be my driver is still the same person who was assigned to be the previous Minister of Tourism driver. He brought him in as his personal driver. I have not asked that he be fired. I have not asked that the secretary to me, who was there for the previous Minister of Tourism, who he brought in, I have not asked that she be fired. I have not. They are human beings, they are St. Lucians, and unless they do something, Mr. Speaker, and I have reason to, I will not ask that they even be transferred, Mr. Speaker. But this member from Castries South made sure 1,000 nice workers were fired within 1 month of becoming Prime Minister. The Cabinet Secretary was removed. The CEO of CIP was removed for no reason, Mr. Speaker. And I can give you tales of people from professionals of St. Lucia who applied to regional organizations, and the previous government told them not to hire them because they were Labour Party people. Janine Compton at the National Trust, and he wants to speak about vindictiveness. And I feel sorry for the staff at GIS, and let me tell you why, Mr. Speaker. Let me explain. I need to put this on record, Mr. Speaker. They were employed as consultants. Their contracts ended the end of March, which is tomorrow. We are looking to restructure GIS. We have asked the Public Service Commission to appoint a Director of Information Services who will come in and restructure. It does not make sense to just renew contracts until that person comes in. We have a discussion and they decide if they want those persons to continue as consultants. So obviously the contracts will not be renewed. It doesn't mean they will not be taken back. But you've made political pawns of them. That's what you all have done. The United Workers' Party has become a wicked party of the highest possible levels. All the surrogates are making political issues of persons who were working in the department. Nobody was told that they are fired. The contracts came to an end. Why are you all doing that? Why are you all jeopardizing the livelihoods of ordinary St. Lucians to pursue cheap political achievements? Why? But that's the nature of the United Workers' Party. That's what they have become. That's what they've become. Nobody in GIS can say that they were fired or they were told they would not be employed again. Why do that to them? You make them look like they are political appointments of yours and we don't want them anymore. You are politicizing it. You know? But I think it's important, Mr. Speaker, we understand that's the character of the UWP that he leads. If you can have your most liked and trusted UWP leave your party and come over to this side, it tells you what the soul of this new United Workers' Party is. And the member has not learned. He has not learned that this politics is not working. He had the worst defeat in the history of the United Workers' Party, and he cannot understand. The worst defeat. But he doesn't understand, Mr. Speaker, that he has to be less vindictive. He has to be more considerate of people. We all make mistakes in life. But, Mr. Speaker, there'll be another defeat coming, and a worse one. But let's leave that for the right and appointed time. So, Mr. Speaker, when I listened to the estimate yesterday, the statement yesterday from the Minister of Finance, I felt a joy in my heart. I really felt a joy in my heart. When I heard the member of Castries spoke about the return of the laptop program, Mr. Speaker, you know, already we received 3,000 laptops on Monday, and I heard there'll be a total of 10,000 laptops, Mr. Speaker. There was joy in my heart, Mr. Speaker, joy. When I heard the return of the distress fund, Mr. Speaker, there was joy in my heart, and if I could have sung, Mr. Speaker, I'd have sung that famous song, Joy, Joy, Joy in my heart. Mr. Speaker, when I heard about the increase in grants, Mr. Speaker, Diabetes Association, there was the FRC, almost every civil society NGO got some increase, Mr. Speaker, because we appreciate the work that they are doing, and we want to say to them in these difficult times, we care about you, and we will give you the extra support. This was a budget of the people. Now you will hear in the response, borrowing, borrowing, borrowing. They said you should not borrow, and they borrowed. Yes, we are borrowing. We have to pay your debts. Yes. We have to. And I heard, Mr. Speaker, the member from Castries spoke of $1,984,000 to pay Ojo Lab debts. Ojo Lab debts. Now, I'm not against any investment in this country, but did we really expect to have come into government and have a bill of $1 million to pay to Ojo Labs? $1 million? Bills, monies were borrowed for COVID. We owed quarantine facilities. We owed, couldn't imagine. I mean, I started to look at the list of payables, and I got depressed, Mr. Speaker. For a CEO, a prime minister who said he would serve as a CEO, he would run this country as a business. I know now why he was never given any business to run. Because everything you give him flops, Mr. Speaker. And when we including the United Workers' Party, Mr. Speaker. And when we get to the policy debate, we will examine the performance of the CEO Prime Minister. But that's for another time. So, Mr. Speaker, I had to create the context within which this debate will take place today. And I hope, Mr. Speaker, you will grant the latitude to my colleague parliamentarians to speak, Mr. Speaker, as necessary and at the right time, when our graciousness shall end. If the honorable member has not spoken, he will not speak again, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let's look at Agency 46, Mr. Speaker. The Ministry of Tourism, Investment, Creative Industries, Culture and Information. You would see, Mr. Speaker, a total operating expenditure of $26,327,400 and capital expenditure of $18,793,500, giving a total allocation of $44,120,900. I would have liked for the Minister of Finance to give us some more, Mr. Speaker. We begged for more. We argued that we were the ones bringing in the most revenue into the country, but the Honorable Minister of Finance was very wise that all sectors must be fully lubricated and that tourism will have to do the extra. And we are prepared, Mr. Speaker, to do the extra. And I will take the opportunity to thank the staff of the Ministry of Tourism, the PS, and all in the Ministry of Tourism, the Tourism Authority, that contribute to the work of the ministry. And I'm not one who's going to say that no work was done before. There have been many ministers of tourism before me, and there will be many after me. And each one would have made his contribution to the success of St. Lucia in tourism, including the member from Castries South. Although he had $50 million a year for 5 years when he was Minister of Tourism, and not one new hotel was built. Not one. And most of it was spent paying monies out to airlines, but that's another story for another time, Mr. Speaker. But he too would have made his contribution. So I'm really grateful for the support of the staff of the ministry. So the St. Lucia Tourism Authority, and the Prime Minister said it yesterday, will be given an extra million this year, and the allocation will be $5 million this year. Historically, the Tourism Authority would get about $27 million yearly. Of course, under the last government, under the leadership of the member from Castries South, the tourism levy was established, and basically it is a charge on accommodation per night per person, and that money is remitted to the Central Tourism Authority for them to use for the expenses and the operations, Mr. Speaker. Yes, post-COVID, the numbers are starting to get back to normal, Mr. Speaker, but we still believe, and the Prime Minister has made it very clear, that he expects tourism to make an extra effort this year, and he doesn't want tourism to be starved of any resources. So although last year they got $4 million, he is very clear in his mind that St. Lucia must continue its strategic positioning, and he's agreed that he'll increase from $4 million to $5 million, plus the anticipated increase in the tourism levy should put the Tourism Authority in a very strong position, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, we're very happy with that contribution. Mr. Speaker, on page 368, program 52, I spoke earlier about the GIS, Information and Broadcasting, and Mr. Speaker, you will see that the vote of $315,830 for consultancy services. And I mentioned earlier that you had persons who were employed as consultants in that department, basically to provide extra strength to the department and to ensure that it can meet its operating requirements. I had mentioned that we are going to have a new Director of Information Services who is going to reorganize the department and decide. Why are you pointing at her? Show some respect, member from Castries South. This is not a joke, Mr. Speaker. GIS crew. So, Mr. Speaker, and of course, once we restructure, we will, you know, government is not a joke, member from Castries South. Government is serious business. That's people's lives. For you, it's a toy, it's a game, but it's people's lives. So let's take it serious. So, Mr. Speaker, of course, when that is done, the new director will decide who he or she wants in the department. Mr. Speaker, I need to move on to page 372, program 66, Culture and Creative Industries. The ministry's mandate for the creative industries and culture is driven by government policy to provide strategic support to that sector, thereby transforming the industry into the vehicle that will drive economic growth in St. Lucia. In this vein, the government anticipates to put more focus and resources towards the development of the orange economy, as it is called. So on page 592, grants and contribution, you'll see an allocation of $7,680,100, Mr. Speaker. In financial year 2020-2021, the last financial year, the budget for the development of the creative industries was $500,000. And this budget then catered to policy and planning, small grants, art in public spaces, community performance program, and the development of the music industry. This budget was reduced by 50% to $250K in 2021-22. So it moved from $500,000 the year before to $250K in the last budget. However, this government, understanding the importance of the development of the creative industries, has restored the level back to $500,000, Mr. Speaker. No, I have it wrong. $500,000 more was approved. So the new level now is $750,000. So just to repeat, Mr. Speaker, it was $500,000. It was reduced to $250,000 last year. The government has decided to add $500,000 on top of that. So we now have $750,000 for the Creative Industries Program. Now, Mr. Speaker, I will speak in the policy about the vision for the creative industries moving forward, but let me just give you an idea, Mr. Speaker, of how the $750,000 will be used. For a small grants program, which will be targeted at activities that facilitate micro-enterprise development, development of skills or artistic practice that are innovative and produce services, products of international standards, create employment and encourage more people to get involved in artistic and creative activities. So we'll be giving grants to persons involved in music and other artistic endeavors. Yeah. The National Performance Program, Mr. Speaker, will be aimed at identifying new talent and developing community cultural bands, because as we move forward with our community tourism, We want to have grants that we can give to communities that want to establish their own community bands. I think almost all the bands we have are largely located in the north of the island. We want to encourage communities to set up their bands. A lot of young people who can play music want to start a band. They can come for a grant from the ministry, and we can help them to get started. We also want to provide support for community events and festivals. The member from Vieux-Fort North had his poetry competition. They have different festivals in different communities. If the communities need a grant so they can organize their solo, I've had a solo in Bassett Joseph for 2 years before COVID. Hopefully they can get a band. There's a band there called Wule Tete, Mr. Speaker, a solo band. And of course, you know, once the COVID protocols allow us to, we want to see solo this year. And we will have a national solo festival, Mr. Speaker. So there will be small grants available for that. Art in the Secret Band is another one, Mr. Speaker, the best known in St. Lucia. Arts in public spaces, Mr. Speaker, the ministry basically will want to encourage communities to identify strategic locations where we can encourage the painting of murals and other artistic expression, Mr. Speaker. And that will strengthen our community tourism. And later on, Mr. Speaker, I will speak about the Emancipation Day program. But, you know, something was done by the last government which is kind of heinous in a way. They painted the CDCs in colors which I think probably were supposed to represent the flag. But it doesn't really come across as having a soul and a personality. Just imagine those buildings being repainted with murals and expressions of national endeavor and our iconic, you know, outstanding citizens. The whole of Castries can now become a vibrant, exciting place if we encourage. At one time you would call it graffiti. It's not called graffiti anymore, it's street art, you know, and it is in many cities an attraction. It's one of the things I love doing when I visit cities is to visit these areas and see that kind of artistic expression. We're hoping to transform Castries along those lines. So we will have money in the budget this year to encourage that kind of activity. And I spoke about emancipation. Mr. Speaker, Emancipation has traditionally had a budget of $20,000. The Prime Minister said to me, not this year. He wants a serious emancipation observance program. Now, well, that was an early emancipation, 26th of July. So the member from Castries East has added $200,000 on top of the $20,000. So we would see in the budget, Mr. Speaker, $220,000 for Emancipation Day observance. But I can tell the honorable member, this morning at 4 o'clock in the morning, I was reviewing the proposal for Emancipation Day, and I sent it to him at about 4:25. And let me tell you, it's an exciting program, really exciting. And I can tell him the $220,000 will not work. I can tell him that from now. I don't want to say too much, but I can assure St. Lucians, this year, we will observe Emancipation Day like we never did before. And the CDF has been mandated to prepare the concept, and together with Events Company, we will execute it. And I'm looking forward, Mr. Speaker. In fact, going through the proposal this morning inspired me to come here this morning, Mr. Speaker, because it will really assert our identity and our history and to look to the future as to what we can achieve as a people, Mr. Speaker. Carnival, Mr. Speaker, you will see under grants and contribution allocation of $3 million for Carnival. Again, Mr. Speaker, it's not enough, and I said so to the honorable member, but of course I understand you can't always get all that you want, Mr. Speaker. Last night we had the media launch for Carnival. It was exciting, Mr. Speaker, and I have to congratulate CDF, Export St. Lucia, St. Lucia Tourism Authority, the Ministry of Tourism, and Events Company of St. Lucia for putting on this event last night. I've been getting reviews from all over, Mr. Speaker, and people are excited about Carnival in St. Lucia. I've spoken to the hotels, we've spoken to the airlines to ensure we have airlift. Our biggest issue will remain, Mr. Speaker, where do we host Carnival? We have put together a plan to have it at the Darren Summit Cricket Ground, but there's a very strong undercurrent that we should make a pitch and argue for us to come back to the streets of Castries and for revelers to enjoy Mega J to Mega J, Mr. Speaker. I cannot rule on this, but I will represent the sector, Mr. Speaker. Carnival is the largest single economic activity in St. Lucia. It is, without a doubt. It is also the month when we have the most arrivals in St. Lucia. There is no doubt about it. And I believe we should give more support to Carnival, artistic expression, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I can say as somebody who's been involved in Carnival, not somebody who's been doing it as a show, that Carnival means a lot to St. Lucians. Calypso means a lot. Mr. Speaker, there were people who came to Calypso tent, enjoying it and front seat. And the day they spoke the first Calypso against them, they disappeared and never came back, Mr. Speaker. If you love the art form, you will always be there, no matter what they say about you, Mr. Speaker. That's where it shows who is genuine and who is not, Mr. Speaker. I'm not mentioning names. I'm not mentioning names. But, Mr. Speaker, Carnival, I really want to make a case for Carnival because I believe it's our biggest tourist attraction in the country, and we really have to make a success of it. Creole Heritage Month, Mr. Speaker, is also provided for, and more monies are made available, Mr. Speaker, and we will be working extra with the Tourism Authority this year to really promote Creole Heritage Month and make it a major addition to our events calendar, Mr. Speaker. I'm still hoping, Mr. Speaker, we might get some money somewhere to have a Creole music festival the first weekend in October. We don't have the monies as yet, Mr. Speaker, but we will do so. And under the policy statement, Mr. Speaker, I will present to the Honorable House a vision of how we see all those events fitting in and uplifting St. Lucia in a positive way, Mr. Speaker. And I'm really excited about the work that has been done. Of course, you will see the regular grant contribution to CDF and Events Company of St. Lucia. During this year, Mr. Speaker, we will take a look at the institutions, and the Governor General, in his forum speech, expressed the view that we will take a look at all the institutions that exist in that space and rationalize them. We will review the Cultural Development Act and make sure that we can establish a way forward where we can use the skills of each agency and be a lot more focused than we are, Mr. Speaker. Sorry? No? For Country and Western Festival. We probably eventually will reach there, but I think there's some core elements we need to put in place first. Emancipation Day, Carnival, Junior Creole. Jazz is coming back next year, Mr. Speaker. Jazz is coming back next year, Mr. Speaker. Can you imagine someone in their wisdom, and I'm using that word deliberately, I'm not saying how wise that person may be, I just said in their wisdom, a country would have built a brand, a premier brand for 25 years, world-renowned brand, and decide to cast it away. And Jazz Festival was removed from the landscape of St. Lucia. After 25 years of hard work by many individuals on both sides of this house, Mr. Speaker, and cast away, because one person felt we do not need Jazz Festival in St. Lucia anymore. But the St. Lucian people want the Jazz Festival back on our landscape, Mr. Speaker. And next year, the Prime Minister has given me instructions to make sure we come to this Honorable House with a provision for jazz next year. And I think he would expect the opening to be in Marshall too. Mr. Speaker, on page 374, program 98, which is the head office for tourism, Mr. Speaker, you will see consultancy services for $509,000, Mr. Speaker. And it's really necessary that we have that allocation because we want to review the legal framework governing the development and management of tourism. And I will address that later on in my policy statement because we have said clearly we are going to transform the tourism industry. More St. Lucians must participate in the tourism industry and own the tourism industry. We will not have a tourism industry that caters for entirely visitors and owned by foreigners. We must own it. And we are going to restructure it to create more space for more participants. We want the cake to get bigger and for everybody now to get a slice. We do not want few people fighting over a smaller pie and some persons having more advantage over others. So we will be reviewing the legislative framework, the policy framework that exists in the ministry to ensure we indigenize the tourism industry as much as possible. I move on to the exciting parts of tourism now, Mr. Speaker. The capital expenditure on page 376, program 45, community tourism, Mr. Speaker. You will see provisions there, Mr. Speaker, for a number of initiatives. You will see a figure which covers, Mr. Speaker, the completion of the fish fry building in Ancillary, Mr. Speaker. This was a project started by the last government. We've continued it because we believe that it is a worthy project. Maybe if we were at the conceptualization stage, we might have done it slightly differently. But the fact is, it is there. It is something that can add tremendous value, and we will continue the project, Mr. Speaker. It will also have provisions to complete the jetty repairs and to install moorings in Ancillary. There is also allocation, and I see the member from Ancillary hitting the desk, so let me even tell him there's even more good news. There is monies to relocate the laundry from the shoreline in Ancillary to the back end, Mr. Speaker. So, again, this is a most needed proposal. It actually started from the last government, so I'm giving the credit to the last government for that. It is necessary, and we agree it has to be completed. Mr. Speaker, I must mention jetty repairs and installation of moorings in Groseley. I must speak of it because the member from Groseley, keeps reminding me that he wants this project started. And I've been asking him for some assistance with the Cicero playing field. And I suspect, Mr. Speaker, as soon as this gets started, work will start immediately on the Cicero playing field. But we have assured him, and of course, the procurement and tendering process is beyond our control, Mr. Speaker. You will also see a provision, Mr. Speaker, for training and capacity building. And Mr. Speaker, I have to speak about that because if we are going to transform the tourism industry, if we are going to implement community tourism, Mr. Speaker, we have to prepare our people for it. We have to educate them. We have to make them understand that they must be willing to welcome visitors into their living space. And I keep saying it, their living space is a recreation space for the visitor. And they must be prepared to allow those persons to share their space, to treat them as guests in their homes, and not to be aggressive or even discourteous to them. So we will be launching a major public education campaign to talk to St. Lucians about tourism, how they can benefit from it, and how they can exploit the possibilities. So, Mr. Speaker, a provision is made for this. I think it's about $480,000, Mr. Speaker. We will also, Mr. Speaker, provide monies to the St. Lucia Development Bank for on-lending to persons who want to invest in community tourism. So, in the various communities, the individuals that have an interest in starting some enterprise related to community tourism, they can contact the community tourism office and they can be guided along the way and apply for a loan or a grant under this provision that we have made. We have $9 million, Mr. Speaker, for that activity, of which this year we're going to put forward $1.6 million. If it's exhausted, we can always replenish it. I've discussed with the Prime Minister. He hasn't said it yes yet, but I saw the glimmer of hope in his eye that we need to bring this lending facility up to $40 million within 5 years of the St. Lucia Labour Party government. We have to. We cannot stop at 9 million. We need to get an extra 20 million. And I've even suggested to him how he can raise that money. You did say yes? I thought you were saying you have already said yes, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, you will find on that page, all the different allocations that are made. In Ancillary, and again for the member from Ancillary Canaries, we are going to complete the 10-room bed and breakfast that was started under the last government, Mr. Speaker. There's $800,000 provided for us to do so, Mr. Speaker. I move on, Mr. Speaker, on page 376, program 43, the OECS Tourism Competitiveness Project, Mr. Speaker. And this one is a real exciting project. I'm a little disappointed, Mr. Speaker, in the last 5 years, the way this whole program was managed by the last government. And again, I don't want to spoil what is a glorious day today in terms of the good news. But, you know, we probably could have been a lot further in terms of how we've implemented some of those projects. Some of it is not the fault of even the ministry or the government. It's just the procurement processes of the World Bank. But certainly a lot better could have been done in some areas. Mr. Speaker, you will see under that allocation, there is the construction of a container box park, duty-free commercial facility at the market, Mr. Speaker. The intention is to have where the old marketing board building used to be, a container park, Mr. Speaker. It's really a shopping complex made out of containers, Mr. Speaker, that will offer to the visitors when they get off the cruise ship and other visitors a place where they can go and get the extras, not what they would get in the vendor's arcade. It will be totally different products, essentially local products that will be on sale there for them. And it is to create a new vibe, a new feeling, a new excitement about the Castries market and the Castries city center. I'm really hoping we can start this project. The contract has been awarded, and we're waiting on the Castries City Council to push forward the process for us. Ironically, no monies were put in from the last government to build a new facility for the vendors. I think the ministry's responsibility is to support moving the vendors, but the vendors need something to move into. So I've spoken to the member from Castries Central, and I've told him that he will have to approach Cabinet. I will give him all the necessary support for us to get some money to build something that is suitable for the vendors so they can be comfortable and they can feel that they too are part of the process. Mr. Speaker, the Soufrière Old Trafford project, again, some work has been done in Soufrière, in the heart of Soufrière, and there was a first phase where a bus terminal, provision market, and food court were constructed. So now we are going to construct concessionaire booths and basically to have vendors selling local products and becoming part of the economic activity. And I'm sure the member for Soufrière Saltibus will be, Soufrière Fossajac will be very happy to know that this project will go ahead and we've made some allocation for that. Then, well, I have a lot of plans, you know. I have a lot of plans. You're just not listening. That's the thing. Mr. Speaker, I mentioned Saltibus because the next item is the rehabilitation of the Strozel Craft Center, Mr. Speaker. I have seen the concept, the drawings, and it's a fantastic concept for us to, you know, to redevelop the craft center in Strozel to really make it a showpiece. It's one of the most beautiful sites you can get with St. Vincent in the background and the Peters, you know, to the north. So that's actually a fantastic part of St. Lucia that I love dearly. The only challenge we have now is the parliamentary representative is on the wrong side, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, I can say to him we have some exciting days ahead for Strozel, real exciting days. And he will have to watch his steps carefully and who he associates with, Mr. Speaker. So, he's wearing blue, the blue wave. Mr. Speaker, I should also mention under the allocation.
Member for Castries South, on the standing order 32.8, you are limited unless extended on the 32.10 to 1 hour, and you have 15 minutes left now.
15 minutes, Mr. Speaker? Yeah. Okay, Mr. Speaker, I'll try and go as quickly as I need. My first half was really explaining to the House the context for the day, Mr. Speaker. I think it's a little unfair for you to have allowed me to say all those things and not give me the extra time, Mr. Speaker.
Remember, how you choose to use your hour is a matter for yourself. But you can always ask any of your members to move for the suspension of 32.8.
20 minutes.
Okay.
For Castries Central.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the member for Castries South be allotted a further 30 minutes to complete his presentation.
Members, the question is that Standing Order 3210 be invoked to allow the member for Castries South an additional 30 minutes, 30 minutes, to complete his presentation. And now put the question, as many as that opinion say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Time is extended by 30 minutes. Member, proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. That's 30 minutes plus the 15 minutes, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I really did not want it to come to this, but thank you very much, colleagues, for giving me the extra time, Mr. Speaker. Let me move quickly, Mr. Speaker. Ancillary Canaries, more good news for Ancillary Canaries. The Canaries Maritime Tourism Development Project. We will be building a market and a restaurant in Canaries to upgrade the face of Canaries and to give more opportunities in Canaries, Mr. Speaker. So Ancillary Canaries will be getting quite a lot. Some of those works were started by the previous representative, but we have taken it, refined it, finessed it, and pushing it forward, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I need to speak about the next 3 projects because they're really special to me, Mr. Speaker. First of all, the Marigot Bay redevelopment project, Mr. Speaker. You would note that monies were spent in Grosile, then VG is coming, Mr. Speaker, in Grosile, and then to Ancillary Canaries, Strozel, Soufre, and they skip Castries North and Castries South, Mr. Speaker. Castries is inland. I was talking about along the coast, Mr. Speaker. So for touristic development, they skip VG, they skip Marigot and Cul-de-sac and all those areas. So we're correcting this historical error, Mr. Speaker. So there'll be quite a redevelopment of Marigot, waterfront redevelopment. And it's exciting, Mr. Speaker, what's going to happen in Marigot over the next 2 to 3 years. The entire waterfront will be redeveloped, Mr. Speaker, under the World Bank project. And we have a private investor and a hotel in the area that's going to redevelop the La Basse area, Mr. Speaker, and really make Marigot, a place where you can really go and it's very vital for the tourism sector. Mr. Speaker, there's a place called Ansfair, Mr. Speaker. If you pass the gas station Millennium Highway heading south, around the corner there is a big rock, Mr. Speaker, lookout area. The tourists are stopping there to take pictures of young people diving off the rock. It's called Cinderella's Sleeper. 2PC, the residents of Cicero call it. We're going to put a lookout and creative space there, Mr. Speaker. And the drawings have just been finished. We're going to get rid of all the traffic issues, make it a safer place. There'll be restaurant, vendors area, Mr. Speaker, so it can really add to the Cicero community. The Buckeye Park, Mr. Speaker, had been developed by Buckeye, was handed over to the last government. They did not take care of it. It went down the drain, Mr. Speaker. We are spending money under this project to develop the Buckeye Beach Park, and it will become the biggest beach park in St. Lucia with all the facilities, volleyball, cricket, football, performance space, Mr. Speaker, vendors, facilities, and Mr. Speaker, the communities of Cul-de-sac and Cicero will benefit from this, Mr. Speaker. Number 9, vendors training. Again, Mr. Speaker, we will be spending resources on training vendors to ensure we have the highest levels of quality in the tourism sector, and that is World Bank project. There's provision for this. A collateral registry, Mr. Speaker, which I think, again, is a critical element for us to have in St. Lucia, where you can register distressed projects. People can register their investments in different projects. It is something which started in the last government, and we think it's an excellent idea, and we're going to go forward with it. We're not going to stop any projects unless we have reason to, Mr. Speaker. But this one is a good project, so we will do it, Mr. Speaker. And finally, under this allocation, there is a regional marketing and promotion campaign that we are part of. We've gotten some of the first draft of what it will look like. St. Lucia has allocated $600,000 for that project, Mr. Speaker, and we expect it to start very soon. So this is tourism, Mr. Speaker. Allow me now to speak about Castries South, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, there's so much I can say about Castries South. Castries South is the constituency of George Charles, the father of the St. Lucia Labour Party. And, Mr. Speaker, Castries South feels that its turn has finally arrived. It has gotten in the past, but especially under the last government, it was made to suffer, and suffer badly, Mr. Speaker. Together with 5 other constituencies, we paid the price for being loyal to the St. Lucia Labour Party. I am from Castries South, Mr. Speaker, I grew up, you know, in an area in Castries South where we had a very strong determination to achieve. We had dreams and aspirations. And many times you don't always believe that the system works for you. And you can become anti-systemic when you don't think that the country and the state takes care of you. And it leads you down paths that you don't really want to go, Mr. Speaker. For me, as a product of Castries South, I dream of transforming Castries South to create more opportunities for individuals. I'm not one who is afraid to say we must create opportunities for our people to create wealth for themselves. We must never believe that our people must depend on the social programs and on the assistance that they get. That's needed. You are vulnerable, you're disadvantaged, and you need that support. But bread, freedom, and justice means creating that space for our people to elevate the standards of living, for the children to become engineers and doctors and lawyers in this country too. There's no reason why the young man on the block cannot look at his son and dream that one day his son will become a lawyer, doctor, or engineer. And that's why we are Labour, because we are creating the opportunities for every household to have a university graduate. We are creating opportunities for the community tourism, for St. Lucians to own the tourism industry. We are creating opportunities for the youth economy for our young people to transform their dreams and their hobbies into professions, Mr. Speaker. That is what it means to us. So for me, Mr. Speaker, the next 5 years will be about transforming Castries South. So I'm pleased today to give you a little idea of some of the things that will happen in Castries South. I want to start off with the roads, Mr. Speaker. The Bassett Joseph Road was the worst road in St. Lucia. The worst road. I know some members will disagree with me. Miko North, Labrie, and some of the others will say they too are some of the worst roads. But that road was supposed to have been fixed. The member from Castries North stood here and announced to this house that they are about to start the road in Bassett Joseph and Marigo. He announced it in this house. In Marigo, the road was started. The board was put up. The contractor was there. And somebody stopped him. I called the member from Castries North and I asked him, what's this all about? The road has started. He took his phone and he called the contractor in my presence and asked him what's going on. And he said, yes, he was given instructions to stop the road works. I won't say who gave him, Mr. Speaker. And for the rest of the term of the last government, the Marigo Road was not finished and the Bassett Joseph was not started. I am pleased to say to this honorable house that these roads will be fixed, Mr. Speaker. And let me tell you, and there is nobody in here who's going to call any contractor to stop the roads, Mr. Speaker. So Castries South, Bassett Joseph, Marigo, you will get your roads, Mr. Speaker. I'm still hoping somewhere in there the member from Castries North will have some monies to work on the Monkey Tongue Road, the old Kentucky Drive. I'll be patient, Mr. Speaker. I'll be patient. But those roads have not been attended to for many years, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, would you believe in Goodlands under the BNTF? They started a construction of concrete roads through Goodlands. Again, it was stopped. For 5 years, the project was not continued. I'm glad to tell you, I've been informed by Equity that the BNTF project has resumed, and even tonight at 5 o'clock, there'll be a meeting in Goodlands where the community will be updated on how the project will recommence and the road will be built. 5 years it was stopped, Mr. Speaker. The community center in Bassett Joseph was half completed, Mr. Speaker. Half completed. If you look on page 6 to 8, you will see a provision for community centers. For 5.5 years, that community center was not completed under the previous government. This budget has provision for the community center in Bassett Joseph to be completed, Mr. Speaker. The community center in Cicero, Mr. Speaker, has been closed for 4.5 years. 4.5 years. The last government refused to come and repair the community center. Well, we need a new community center now. Not this budget, but I believe we need to start thinking of the years to come. Cicero needs a new community center, Mr. Speaker. Fuasho Community Center needs upgrading, Mr. Speaker. Again, 5 years. And Mr. Speaker, you really have to visit Fuasho to see the public facility that's downstairs the community center. There's no electricity. The toilets are all broken. And I cannot tell you the number of persons who depend on using that facility to relieve themselves, Mr. Speaker. And there is going to be provision in this budget for some repairs to be made to the Fuasho Community Center and the Fuasho facility. Mr. Speaker, playing fields. Castries South, and let's just take Cicero, F2, is bigger than Dennery South. Bigger than Dennery South. But there's no standard size playing field in Cicero. Dennery South has 2 international size playing fields, Mr. Speaker. We can't get one, Mr. Speaker. I've spoken to the member from Grosile about doing at least some basic repairs. Just repair the surface and just give us something that is decent. And would you believe, Mr. Speaker, just before the last election, I wanted to put lights on the Cicero playing field. I wrote 2 letters to the former Minister of Sports for permission. He denied me permission to put the lights on the playing field. That I was going to do. I had sourced the poles, the lights. I had gotten Lucia to agree to do the wiring for me. I was not allowed to do it. But then a candidate of the United Workers' Party decides he wants to put lights on the field. So he used some electrical poles, put some lights. A few days before elections, came with a generator and put on the lights. No, he used a generator, put on the lights. And then when the event was finished, took the generator and left. So up to today, there are no lights on the field. There are poles, but there's no electricity. That is the substance of the United Workers' Party, Mr. Speaker. That's how they try to fool people. I heard a member from Microsoft was supposed to be there. In fact, he was in the area. There was videos of him walking in the area, whatnot. And he and the former member of Castries South is boasting that he will be the first one to go down at the elections of July 26, Mr. Speaker. But let's move on, Mr. Speaker. Cicero playing field, we will upgrade it. It will be upgraded, and the young men and women of Cicero will have a proper surface at least, Mr. Speaker. I also intend to put an outdoor gym. I've had the outdoor gym in a container for more than 4 years waiting to put it on the playing field. I could not get permission to do so. It will happen this year, Mr. Speaker. There is no colleague in this House that will make any call to stop me from fixing the Cicero playing field, putting the lights, and putting the outdoor field, gym on the field, Mr. Speaker, so it will happen. Land ownership, Mr. Speaker, in Castries South is a critical issue. Goodlands, Monlatok, Turnell Road, Mr. Speaker, serious land ownership issues. I have done 2 tours with Crown Lands Department. We've identified all the Crown Lands in Castries South. We've identified all the lands that squatters have been, persons have been living on, some of them for 50, 60 years, Mr. Speaker, and they have no rights on those lands. We're going to correct that. I know, as a St. Lucian, the importance of owning a piece of this land. So many families can send their children to school, to university, by having a piece of land that they can mortgage. That's how I went to university. And there's a whole long story about it, Mr. Speaker. I want my constituents to be in a position where they can own a piece of St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker. And we will commence, Mr. Speaker, with the Monlatok, Goodlands, and Turnell Road to make sure that the people start owning a piece of land. They can take that ownership, they can go to the bank, they can get a loan for their child to go and get some training, whether at university, whether at the tertiary school, to advance themselves, Mr. Speaker. Giving land to our people that they can use to mortgage and security is a strong statement of empowerment of our people. And I want to make sure, Mr. Speaker, Castries South constituents benefit from it. I know the member from Castries North knows Monlatok very well, so he knows about that situation. He grew up in that area. So he's, Mr. Speaker, I spoke earlier on about the lay-by at Anne's Fair, Mr. Speaker, Buckeye, Marigo. But I also want to tell you, Mr. Speaker, the Mon lay-by, you will notice we've kind of closed it because there are structural issues. And there was talk about just repairing it and allowing the vendors to go back there, but we decided we're not going to do this. We're doing things differently in Castries South. So we are designing a new lay-by, one that will be different, Mr. Speaker, will be an attraction in itself, will speak of the aspirations of people in Castries South. So the new lay-by will have proper vendors' booths, it will have a restaurant, it will have proper facilities, and the constituents of Castries South that use that lay-by will be blessed with a facility that they can be proud of, Mr. Speaker. So it probably will start in the next few months, but this will be a statement of the possibilities that exist in St. Lucia for ordinary people wanting to earn a livelihood and for the constituents of Castries South. We also have plans under the UBEC, the Unlocking the Blue Economy of the Eastern Caribbean. We want to build an underwater sculpture park that will add to our tourism product. But we've issued a consultancy to identify the best place to put the sculpture park. And as it turns out, Mr. Speaker, one of the leading areas for the sculpture park is somewhere behind the gas station and along the Millennium Highway, which happens to be in Castries South. Now, I don't know what the final conclusion of the consultants will be, but if for some reason it happens to be in Castries South or maybe in Ancillary, because I think these are the two shallow areas with the right, I think currents and whatever else. I'm still hoping we are preferred to Ancillary, Mr. Speaker, but a sculpture park will really add to our tourism product, Mr. Speaker. And whichever community that gets it will really benefit from having a sculpture park. Mr. Speaker, the Banan area where the fishermen are. Now, there's so much I can talk about, Mr. Speaker, because the member from Mico South came to Banan, and he was masquerading, Mr. Speaker, of all the, with Big Daddy, Mr. Speaker, all the things he would do in Banan and all the promises, and nothing happened, Mr. Speaker. We are going to take this further. We all agree, both sides, all agree that we cannot continue to allow this area to just develop uncontrolled, Mr. Speaker. It's the first thing the cruise ship passengers see. St. Lucians themselves in the area want to see something that is more aesthetically appealing, Mr. Speaker. So we're going to redevelop this area, Mr. Speaker, and it's going to become a real showpiece again, part of our tourism product, but also to another statement of the possibilities in Castries South. Mr. Speaker, I'm about to close, but I need to say something about CDP. For 5 years, as a parliamentary rep for Castries South, I did not get a cent under the CDP to spend in Castries South. This will change this year. Under this government, we will all get our allocation to spend under the CDP. Even the opposition, Mr. Speaker. I cannot say how much anybody will get, how much I will get, how much they will get. The Prime Minister is a very gracious man. But I'm mindful of the fact I did not get for 5 years. So, Mr. Speaker, I shall lobby strongly for Castries South to get its share so we can start building footpaths once again, start building steps, Mr. Speaker, rubble walls where people's homes are starting to come down, Mr. Speaker, to help people with guttering, Mr. Speaker, because so many people build houses, there's no guttering, water is just running through the community, to really upgrade the CDP, the infrastructure in the constituency. And I'm looking forward to the CDP funds being made available. For 5 years, Mr. Speaker, I had a very active program in my constituency. Pageant, carnival, sports, domino competition, so many activities I did in my constituency. And I'm looking forward, Mr. Speaker, over the next couple of years to reinforce those social programs and really assist my constituents as best as I can. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to end by saying to you that I'm really excited after listening to the Prime Minister yesterday present the figures. I'm looking forward to the policy debate when we can really start selling the vision of what those figures stand for, what those figures will represent, Mr. Speaker. We are going to transform this country. The figures show it. The figures show that we care about people. This is a people's budget. The amount of monies we are giving to the social institutions to empower them. Mr. Speaker, I've said a lot that's going to happen in tourism, but I'm almost jealous of the Ministry of Equity for the amount of resources that has been given to them to focus on the people, Mr. Speaker. When the member for Castries South speaks, you will hear how we have shifted the focus to the people, to give more to the people, more support to the people. And through tourism and through other sectors, agriculture and others, you can see the shift to creating more opportunities for the people of St. Lucia to create more sustainable livelihoods. This is the government I want to be part of. This is the government that I'm proud of, Mr. Speaker. So I take my leave, Mr. Speaker, expressing my support for the estimates. And I end, Mr. Speaker, reminding the member from Mico South, do not forget he has to speak before the anointed time, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
Got an instruction. instruction.
Member for Castries South East.
Introduction. You going after me?
That's a different guy.
Oh my God.
That's the real guy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, colleagues. Mr. Speaker, it's in order for me to state that in accordance with the Constitution, the Minister of Finance has laid before this Honorable House the estimates of revenue and expenditure for the financial year 2022-2023. But permit me, Mr. Speaker, to thank the people of Castries South, my family, my friends. Names are so numerous to mention, but permit me to highlight some people who are very dear to me, and I speak of persons like Arshel, persons like Dr. Isaac, Mr. Poyot, the persons Ika James, and all of those persons who rallied very early with this campaign, and of course has saw it fit for me to be here. My family, and therefore, when I decided to embark on this journey in 2015, I remember being interviewed and asked why did I choose Castries South East. I said because my family is in Castries South East, the people of therefore, the Henrys, the Josephs, the Volneys, and I love them dearly, and I knew that they would see me through, and they came through this year. But in addition to this, Mr. Speaker, permit me to do something very special this morning before I delve into this debate. There is a lady we refer to as Dedet in Coolitown. And of course, Mr. Speaker, I wish to join you, but I do not know whether to say happy birthday to Dedet because her family considered to be 111 years old. Reason being that only last week she buried her last daughter that was 68 years old. I celebrated in time past a birthday with Dedet, but this morning I am asking, how do you say happy birthday to someone whose God has promised to have given 111 or approximately thereabout, but who also has seen 3 of her children buried, and one is still alive. 3 of them are alive, but one is about 85 years old. I can only share with Dedet this morning the words of a song written by Keith Getty. That song, that hymn, or the last verse of that hymn was made popular by Botham Jean. And I recalled my son having to play the tribute to Botham at his passing. But I will use these words to just share with Dedet and her daughter. And I quote, "No guilt in life, no fear in death. This is the power of Christ in you, Dedet. From life's first cry to final breath, Jesus commands your destiny. No power of health, no scheme of man can ever pluck you out of his hands till he returns or call you home. Here in the power of Christ, you will stand." And I say these words to Dedet, and she will see me very soon. Mr. Speaker, allow me to add my voice in providing justification for and lend support to these estimates totaling $1,842,813,200, as well as my endorsement of the same. Today I will cite some specific inclusions as it relates to the mandate of the Ministry of Equity, Social Justice, and Empowerment. Mr. Speaker, I will also use this opportunity to highlight the benefits of this budget to the people of Castries South East. And as I speak, I would like for, Mr. Speaker, for them to reference pages 419 to 441 and page 593 substantially where there are grants and contribution. Mr. Speaker, I advised our people who are listening to pay attention to the debate. Do not be led by persons who tell you what is being said. There is pappy show. Mr. Speaker, there are persons who take advantage of these times, and of course I know for a very long time they would quietly speak to ministers and ask and benefit from the proceeds of a budget like this. So I ask the ordinary people of Castries South East, who in time past may consider this not important, to pay attention to the presentations made in this honorable house this year. Mr. Speaker, as I delve into the specific allocations, I wish to remind us that the core mandate of the Ministry of Equity is to promote rights-based human developments and to facilitate the economic, social, cultural, political, and spiritual advancement of individuals, households, communities, and the society through poverty reduction, social protection, and empowerment. Mr. Speaker, this is just an elaborate way of saying that we care about our people. Yes, all the people, all St. Lucians, that's why we put them first. Mr. Speaker, the 2022-23 estimates of revenue and expenditure as presented by our Prime Minister reflects a notable improvement over last year's budget as it relates to the support for the social sector, and for this I am particularly grateful. Mr. Speaker, my colleagues would have known by now that this Minister of Equity wants as much as possible for the poor people of St. Lucia. In fact, I am always guided carefully by my colleagues that we need to have a balance as we approach and navigate the development of our country. And I understand by now, Mr. Speaker, that the Prime Minister is well able to bring us to a safe harbor as it relates to the fiscal and economic realities of St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, just by way of example, let us look at the grants and contribution, page 593 in the estimates that is presented before this House. Mr. Speaker, we witness an increase from $7,587,128 in the last financial year, 2021-22, to an allocation of $12,731,892 for this fiscal year. And similarly, Mr. Speaker, the overall agency budget has increased from $50,567,613 to $61,513,793, an overall of $16 million to the social sector as it relates to the Ministry of Equity. For me, this is a reassuring and a reminder of the commitment of this government to put people first. Mr. Speaker, the prevailing social issues to be addressed are many, and we cannot afford to turn a blind eye. As the Minister for Equity, Social Justice and Empowerment, I come face to face, Mr. Speaker, on a regular basis with the harsh social realities which seemingly characterize our environment and seriously threaten the stability of our communities and the nation. I see the reality of broken families who are unable to provide for their basic needs, the reality of mothers, fathers, and others who have lost their jobs, the reality of the elderly who are unable to take care of their medical needs. Mr. Speaker, we hear of criminal acts and other manifestations of social ills in our society, issues which demands our attention, not only in words but in action. And this Prime Minister, Honorable Philip J. Pierre, has taken action. And so, Mr. Speaker, I thank the Honorable Prime Minister for the decision to provide some much needed additional resources to address the myriad of social issues which we face to invest in people and to build our human capital. Clearly, this is a step in the right direction. Certainly more resources are needed to appropriately deliver on our social mandate, but I am convinced that as our economic situation improves, we will see greater investment in this sector as this government understands the harsh realities on the ground and need to keep the people at the center of our national development approach. Mr. Speaker, I will now briefly speak on some of the key areas with noted improvements in the allocation for 2022-23 financial year. These include 1, increased allocation for social assistance program. Mr. Speaker, Honorable Prime Minister, I welcome the additional injection of resources for implementation of our social assistance program, which include the expanded public assistance, foster care, and child disability grant programs, as well as the assistance program for persons living with HIV. The combined total, which now stands at over $20 million, signifies a critical understanding of our social landscape and a genuine interest and desire by the government to provide the much needed assistance to our vulnerable brothers and sisters. Mr. Speaker, it speaks of a government with a social conscience, a caring government that is determined to invest in human capital development towards sustainable national development. Mr. Speaker, it was also pleasing to hear what was the pronouncement from the Acting Governor General during the delivery of the throne speech yesterday, that the elderly persons with disabilities, single parents, will be especially targeted for social assistance. This is good news, as I have encouraged my ministry to place greater emphasis on issues relevant to persons with disabilities in the 2022-2023 financial year. Mr. Speaker, young mothers who can't go for an interview for a job because they cannot find their disabled child at a daycare center or at a home where they can be cared for, our broken children or our disabled children, we must love them and care for them. I see young mothers every day coming to the Ministry of Equity with their children with disability on their own, trying to manage their children while seeking for better. Mr. Speaker, as we have received these resources, it brings hope that we can do better and that we care and we are putting our people first. I speak of TAFA. Mr. Speaker, not recently I saw a young person who sat in my office managing a child. She's only 24, an 8-year-old. But that child is autistic. And I asked, how can a 24-year-old single mother manage to seek for employment while having to take this child all around with her? Mr. Speaker, that is why this ministry is giving the assurance we will continue to leverage all the social protection programs to explore the design of new relevant programs and strengthen partnership for the delivery of social services that is efficient, effective, and that contributes to improvement in the situation of our vulnerable families. Mr. Speaker, I can tell you that I have commenced discussion with CDB to look at the possibility of developing a home for children with disability, a daycare center for children with disability, so that young mothers like Tafa and others who are unable to seek employment can find a place to lay their troubled child or the child who is given some challenge, and they can look for better for their family. Mr. Speaker, I wish to speak on the issue of hope, an area that was not funded. We allocated to the Hope program, ironically at a time in 2020-2021, when persons were losing their job and protection was desperately needed by many, Hope was not funded. Despite that fact, short-term employment component was just occasioned, and a few persons got employment. This year, I am encouraged that there is hope. Yes, this current government is restoring hope. It will be funded to the tune of $2.7 million, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as a responsible and an accountable institution, we will ensure that those funds are strategically used to support various interventions at the community and constituency level, including facilitating the graduation of households from public assistance. We'll also strengthen the welfare services unit, which is currently staffed with 4 field officers for the entire island, attending to the needs of 3,600 households, in addition to clients of other social assistance programs. Mr. Speaker, this arrangement is not optimal and must be revisited. Mr. Speaker, the Human Services Division will also be strengthened for an increase in capacity to the demands placed upon it, whether it be as a result of legislative requirement or simply in response to the manifestations of social ills or deviant behaviors. Within this division, we will specifically assess and address the capacity needs of the organization to provide counseling services and psychosocial support to individuals and families. And yes, colleagues, ministers, we will support poverty and vulnerability reduction activities within your constituencies. And under the Hope program, you will experience what it means to be hopeful. Yes, where there is life, Mr. Speaker, there needs to be hope. And where there is hope, there will be dreams. And when dreams are clear, there will become goals. And like from the words of my good friend Matthias Wilkie, there will be success and our people will overcome through hope, because again, we have placed them first. Mr. Speaker, housing assistance. Similar to the Hope program, the housing support program, usually administered through the SSDF, was not funded in 2021-2022 budget. And so, Mr. Speaker, we are grateful, more than grateful, for an allocation of $1.3 million to support social assistance program as it relates to housing assistance. We will ensure that there are no overlaps between the National Housing Program as it relates to the intention to utilize this program to assist those deemed to be extremely poor, indigent, or vulnerable as a result of targeting, as well as the graduation process for public assistance program beneficiaries. Mr. Speaker, we welcome the support of $1.3 million under the St. Lucia Social Development Assistance Program for housing assistance specifically. Identified for educational assistance program, Mr. Speaker, we also know that job losses as a result of COVID-19 have negatively impacted fiscal space for households and significantly reduced their ability to meet some of their most basic needs. This includes the ability to purchase school supplies for the children. The educational assistance, Mr. Speaker, in that regard, will respond. The EAP is now back at the St. Lucia Social Development Fund, educational assistance. This represents a key social assistance intervention for vulnerable households within all 17 constituencies. Yes, Mr. Speaker, we have finally gotten back in putting our people first, because this government has demonstrated its support, and a total of $1.8 million for educational assistance, Mr. Speaker, will be received for educational assistance for all of our children in St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, allow me to speak to the increase in subventions at the St. Lucy's Home and the St. Lucia Blind Welfare Association. Mr. Speaker, it has been a challenging for humanitarian organizations, institutions as the St. Lucy's Home and the St. Lucia Blind Welfare Association, who depends in large measure for fundraising efforts and the benevolence of citizens and organizations. Increasing their subvention to absorb increased prices for goods and services is certainly welcomed by the ministry as well as the mentioned institutions. We note an increase of $20,000 and $13,000 in the subventions to the St. Lucy's Home and the St. Lucia Blind Welfare Association respectively. But also, Mr. Speaker, we also recognize the recognition of Feed the Poor ministries. Mr. Speaker, and I also take the opportunity to recognize persons like Cici from Ancillary and also other persons who have been supporting and doing their own humanitarian services. The St. Lucia Social Development Fund, as I've said and I've called to Cici, will come by and support these individuals to ensure that they can be impactful on the ground as they also serve St. Lucians. Yes, Mr. Speaker, I also want to mention that we receive support for the Boys Training Center. And the Boys Training Center is a government-owned and managed institution that serves as a residential facility for juveniles who are in conflict with the law, as well as those who are in need of care and protection. The center has a critical mandate focused on the rehabilitation of juveniles and the provision of holistic care to all residents. However, in order to effectively execute its mandate, appropriate resources are an imperative. I am informed, Mr. Speaker, that the BTC has submitted the request for rehabilitation of the fence as well as a new pickup to replace the 21-year-old one on more than one occasion. Until now, the response has not been favorable. We are grateful, Mr. Speaker, and we are happy that the Prime Minister is now providing the required funds to replace the 21-year-old vehicle of Boys Training Center and to rehabilitate the fence, the chain link fencing. Mr. Speaker, the Upton Girls Training Center, the Upton Gardens Girls Center. This center is very important, and of course, this center is promoted as a second chance for our young ladies who have dropped out of high school or were not successful at their first attempt at the CSEC. But of course, Mr. Speaker, in January 2020, the center introduced CSEC and the CVQ programs, which require that instructions in the relevant areas be facilitated by qualified teachers. Currently, the center utilizes the services of one teacher to cover both maths and English. This has been difficult for the young ladies to attain the quality of support that they need. And again, the Prime Minister has seen it fit to support and provide the resources so that we can have an additional teacher for mathematics at the Upton Girls Center. Mr. Speaker, I wish to thank the Permanent Secretary and staff of the Ministry of Equity for providing all of the support they have provided in time past. Ms. Velda Joseph, the Permanent Secretary and the Deputy Permanent Secretary, has provided me with support. Everyone that I met there are still working. There's been no victimization, and there will be no victimization. And for that reason, Mr. Speaker, I wish to pause a moment and to look at Castries South constituency. Mr. Speaker, just by way of example, when a father passed, leaving behind his children, his mother, and children, she has to take care of the children while she's unemployed or unemployed. And of course, Mr. Speaker, the support that is given by this Prime Minister to the Ministry of Equity will ensure that some of our critical single mothers would receive support. Mr. Speaker, we also would like for them to graduate out of poverty. And I want, by way of example, to tell you that the holistic opportunities for personal empowerment, HOPE, will provide the support, employment opportunities, as well as capacity building for our people in Castries South. Mr. Speaker, in the estimates of expenditure, I understand that there will be $10 million grant under the Ministry of Commerce for small businesses. Mr. Speaker, I will speak of the James Belgrave problem in another sitting, probably when we deal with policy, but to inform this House that the James Belgrave Fund has been removed on the list of businesses in Lucia because the former administration ignored doing what was due to have it registered. So now we cannot even get signatories to sign checks at the James Belgrave, at the Bell Fund. I have asked the Attorney General to assist, but of course, Mr. Speaker, here we are. Not only that we have been thrown out of the list of registered businesses, the James Belgrave Fund, but also we are placed on the 4th floor, Mr. Speaker, in a building in how you call this place, in up north, Blue Coral? Not the Blue Coral building. The Big Mall, I think this is the Prime Minister's business. The Gablewoods Mall, a place where there was once a gym. Sunny Acres. Mr. Speaker, yes, Body Inc. You need to climb a flight of stairs, Mr. Speaker, 4-story high, to get to Bell Fund if you are looking for a micro enterprise loan. And downstairs, this building, you have fast cash.
Whose building it is? Whose building is?
I was looking towards the senior minister to answer that question. But I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, not only that Bell Fund was placed in a place where it's not accessible to the poor and vulnerable who need micro-enterprise, but also it has now been removed from the list of registered business by way of a gazette, and now we're having difficulties to sign checks. Mr. Speaker, we are addressing this, and Bell Fund very quickly will return to the Blue Coral building in the center of town, because again, we are putting the people first.
What's his naughty colony houses in the Coral?
Mr. Speaker, in relation to housing assistance for the people of Castries South, we will do our best to support our people as far and as wide as possible. But of course, just to provide a sneak peek into what is possible, we in Castries South support the housing assistance program both at the level of the National Housing Assistance Program and at the level of SSDF, and that our senior people will be prioritized. Mr. Speaker, it is not fair that senior people do not have washrooms and do not even have pit latrines in 2021. That is the reality of senior people living in Castries South. Mr. Speaker, just by way of example, Bokowen in Sarat, Bokowen was not even sleeping on a bed because the mattress was always wet. So the roof was leaking and the bed was always wet and not enough sunshine to dry it. So for days and months, and as the community would say, Bakouen Paka Domi a sou pièce couché, assisi ka assise a sou chaise pour sommeil poué. Mr. Speaker, I know for a fact that terror and cul-de-sac, that was her situation also when I entered the home. Not only that she did not sleep on a bed, she took her tobacco and she sat on a chair to fall asleep. And she was 80 years old. While in campaign, I was happy that some good people joined me to restore her home and to provide her with a new bed. And I'm happy today that the the honorable member for Central Castries has provided the resources. And I'll tell you next week, we will go and celebrate with Bakouen, the 80-year-old, because we've now built him a brand new home and he has a bed to sleep on. Mr. Speaker, we cannot afford to have our senior people living in such conditions. And I ask my friends and supporters of Castries South, those who have housing needs, to bear with me. I have received so far requests totaling over $20 million. But I will tell you that Ms. Seal, Ceci, and other senior persons must be assisted. If we do not do this, we will not be at peace. It is not acceptable that our senior people are living in homes without washrooms or pit latrines. Mr. Speaker, as it relates to Castries South, I speak of the Early Childhood Center that will be constructed in Wavin-Poisson under the BNTF program. And according to the BNTF project manager, works are scheduled to begin in the next 6 to 8 months. Mr. Speaker, the current Early Childhood Center is in a community center that is way inadequate. And some years ago, while I was responsible in another life for the BNTF program, that was earmarked to be addressed. But as soon after election, Mr. Speaker, I rushed to the site, and I'm happy that we are making amends. Mr. Speaker, not only that we will be addressing the issue of Wavin-Poisson Early Childhood Center, Mr. Speaker, I have taken the occasion to meet with all administrators of early childhood centers in Castries South. Mr. Speaker, there are 9 early childhood centers, 6 assisted by government, and 3 that are private. Mr. Speaker, the impact of COVID on private preschools have not just affected the children who attend preschools, but also the administrators. They cannot run their preschool because they do not have the numbers, and the children are not benefiting. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to inform them, as I've had discussions with them, through the Constituency Development Program, this parliamentary representative will assist private preschools to ensure that our children attend school, and we provide support to these administrators so that they can earn a living in the service they provide to the communities. Mr. Speaker, not only that we discussed the issue of the early childhood centers and ensuring the children attend school, but Mr. Speaker, under the Constituency Development Fund, we have already arranged to have a retired police band to include at all early childhood centers in Castries South the issue of musical skills. So some years ago, Mr. Speaker, I acquired musical bells totaling the quantity for each early childhood center in Castries South. But for fear that it may be viewed as a political plot, I did not distribute them. And I'm happy today that they are still sealed in their packages, and very soon we will celebrate the curriculum of music by a skilled musician from the police band, from the police band, for our early childhood centers in Castries South, because our children are our future and we need to place them first. Mr. Speaker, social infrastructure under the CDP. Mr. Speaker, those of us who understand World War II and the impact on families recognize that following World War II, what did countries did? They built parks, recreational parks for people. Families would take their children and would go to recreational parks to sit down, enjoy a moment. Mr. Speaker, for that reason, The impact of COVID on Castries South, the second largest constituency, has been tremendous. And for this reason, Mr. Speaker, you would see within this term the establishment of parks in Bexo, therefore Coolitown and Twapito. Mr. Speaker, you would also recognize the establishment of steel band sheds to be established in Bexo and Badi Chaussee. Mr. Speaker, drainage work in Cul-de-sac, therefore, and Goodlands have been estimated by the Ministry of Infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, I know of one area during the time of the campaign, and as a quantity surveyor, I recognize that and I've never seen such a thing happen in the procurement strategy for works. I saw each family on either side of the drain being awarded a contract to build a drain. And I found that to be painful. How could a drain run between two families and you give each one of them a contract, you share the contract amount, and you ask them to build a drain? Who takes responsibility for excavation? Who builds the wall? Are they going to divide the drain from the center line? And each of them going to build half of a drain to build one drain? Are they going to measure a length and take responsibility? And both of them happen to be two mothers. How do you ask two mothers who are concerned about drainage problems to undertake the construction of a drain running on the boundary line between two families? $15,000 each? I knew that was way inadequate. Mr. Speaker, I took the Ministry of Infrastructure to the site following elections, and I've received a quotation totaling $80,000 to effect the works. So I take it that these people, there and therefore, were taken for a joke, or it was a more political transaction. Mr. Speaker, our people are too important, whether it is a day before election, to be treated as pawns for politics. And therefore, I will see to it that for the right mechanism, for the right appropriate procurement strategy and proper design of this drain, because it is critical that it's implemented properly, that the people in therefore by Rabbi receive a proper drain to ensure that their homes are safe. By Miss Esnad Home, and of course let me say to my people up on the Therefore Hill, by Uncle Cyril, Lyria, Diana, and those of you family members on the hill where that place has been abandoned for years. You will not receive a footpath. If it's possible to have vehicular access, you deserve it too, and you deserve the best because you are St. Lucians, you pay taxes. I think, Mr. Speaker, it's important that we treat our people in that manner. Mr. Speaker, under the DVRP, Disaster Vulnerability Risk Reduction Program, Mr. Speaker, I will not go into the details of this from a quantity surveying standpoint or even from a design standpoint. But this is the most hurtful thing I have encountered as someone who spent 25 years in the public service. Mr. Speaker, I am proud to say that I gained a lot of experience working at the Ministry of Planning. I worked on the Castries market and prepared the bills of quantities, both for the redevelopment of the Castries market. I worked on the VH hospital with the French. I worked on so many projects in St. Lucia, working in the Ministry of Planning as a quantity surveyor. But when I saw what's going on in Bexo, Mr. Speaker, we need to ask ourselves, should we allow this to happen in St. Lucia? How do you build a court, a covered court, with a mezzanine level and call it under drawing an HRDC under the Disaster Vulnerability Risk Reduction in the basin of the Bexo River? Mr. Speaker, both John Peters and former civil servants, technical persons know that this area was zoned to remove the school. That's why under the Basic Education Reform Project, we did not renovate the school there because we said it's prone to flooding. The facts are there in the ministry. Yet we're spending $10 million to build an HRDC under the Disaster Vulnerability Risk Reduction. Disaster Vulnerability Risk Reduction. How could you spend $10 million under a disaster vulnerability risk reduction to place something in an area in a disaster zone where the same government with evidence on file said that they will not renovate that school, relocate it. But the evidence is there under Thomas. Logs were placed as high, above 15 feet, on the playing field in the same location. The St. Lucia Social Development Fund, with FIFA, invested $200,000 to remove the debris on the Bexar playing field. How today, and Mr. Speaker, how do you cure such a problem? The contract has been awarded, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the contract has been awarded. The contractor has actually built a foundation, a part of the foundation. But guess what, Mr. Speaker? As fate would have it, the bolts to be placed to receive the superstructure, the suppliers of the bolts said that the design is faulty and cannot provide the bolts. A usual situation when you construct in steel frame. In designing steel frame, anybody who is involved in engineering would tell you that the design of your bolts is critical. Why? Because the design is faulty. But the inverted beams are there. The slab, you know, almost $1 million have been spent. How do you cure this? If I abort the project, they'll say that I'm not proceeding with it. If I proceed with it and something happened down the road, they would say that this minister is liable. Mr. Speaker, I have invited the community to take a lead to ask me how to proceed with this. But Mr. Speaker, not only that I have this one under the VRP, there is a project with containers on the banks of the river, Mr. Speaker. And this one is painful. Painful, Mr. Speaker, because I do not want to cheat the people of Castries South or the people of Bexar. I think any project that has started by the previous administration that is good for the people should and must be continued. But Mr. Speaker, I cannot even get the drawings for the project. I cannot get the drawings. I went into physical planning, I cannot get it. I went into economic affairs, I cannot get the drawings. Lo and behold, a gentleman in Odsa showed me the drawings and he said, I cannot have it. And when I look at the title of the drawings, Mr. Speaker, it is a firm from Bexar that doesn't exist in Bexar. When I ask, who is that firm, they tell me it's Big Daddy, the one who went up against you. He is the designer of the project. How could that be, Mr. Speaker? How could that be? And how do I cure this? But Mr. Speaker, the more vexing issue with regards to this project is that this project consists of a strip of land along the river banks. Of course, it's slightly elevated and it gives a perception that there's security because it's elevated, but it is right on the river banks, almost 2 feet from the river. And what happens? Mr. Speaker, an engineer said to me, I need to be careful with containers on the river banks because it's somewhere in the Union area. There was some time ago that there were some guys with containers. And when a storm came, he took one of the containers and he destroyed the shock bridge. So the 8 containers that are welded together with a steel frame at the top, with a storm can dislodge the steel frame, dislodge the tanks, take it into the river, and all you have is weapons heading down the stream. Mr. Speaker, how do I cure this? The engineers tell me it is madness. Monies have been spent. Mr. Speaker, I have said in the cabinet room, and of course by now, I suspect most persons would have called me the procurement guru. I'm not a procurement guru, but I am sensitive to the fact that when you do not approach construction business properly, you will land yourself in problems. It is one of the most serious undertakings because the largest employer of construction activity in any island is the government. And construction business is a risky business.
Member for Castries South East, you have 15 minutes left.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'll be on time. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm saying that with regards to the Disaster Vulnerability Risk Program, the CDP projects that has been commenced in Castries South East, we have a serious problem, and it will take more than just this parliamentary representative to solve it. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, I am extremely happy with the approach that I've taken. Through the Ministry of Community Development, I have embraced the Social Transformation Officer, the Youth Officer, and we have established within each community of Castries South, we have started development committees. And let me say to you, Mr. Speaker, in my absence, they were elected democratically. Some of them are UWPs, but they will take responsibility for their own communities. And they will guide and take ownership. So the issue of empowerment and through the support provided by the Minister of Finance for equity will not only ensure that we move safer, but we will shift the approach of governance to ensure that the people take responsibility and no politician or parliamentarian parachute themselves over people and decide that they know exactly what people need if the people are not allowed to participate in the decision. Mr. Speaker, for that reason, I can tell you that Castries South is on the way to be a strong constituency. Mr. Speaker, I will tell you that the council that we have elected will have a significant role, and that is why, Mr. Speaker, very soon, Castries South East Council will receive a coaster, 29-seater, brand new to transport the children of Castries South East. Yes, I know that's a surprise. Why? Because transportation is a public good. And Castries South East will receive a small truck. Because if you have a council, not looking like the city council, but if you have a council where people were supposed to empower the people, well, you don't need one, you're right in the city. You understand? You need to show the strength of council so that the people can own, feel empowered, and take decisions for themselves. Mr. Speaker, I do not intend to proceed with anything in Castries South East without the participation of the people. I do not plan to embark on any mission without the people of Castries South East. And that is why you would see on a flyer on social media that not that I've given just the constituency office or the secretary's number from the Ministry of Equity, but every taxpayer who have a stake in the constituency, from the youth worker, the social transformation officer, the welfare officer, myself, and everybody who is responsible for Castries South East. And we have established community development committees that are energized and that feel empowered to move forward. Mr. Speaker, we will change the look of Lacwa. Mr. Speaker, you would see that there's some sort of activities taking place in Lacwa, and I'm happy that the Minister for Tourism has agreed to join me in replacing what look like huts into something better so that our people can exploit their trade and sell to look better. So there will be a lovely place to behold. Also at the MAC, Bexor Junction, we will develop that entrance or that place to map so that persons who are applying the trade can do so with the necessary facilities. Mr. Speaker, I've asked that our bus shelters must be strategically placed. Mr. Speaker, there are certain parts of Bel Air when the people are waiting for the bus, if it starts to rain, they must go back to their home very far because there's no bus shelter. The people in Flosa, no bus shelter. You understand? Mr. Speaker, these are the small things that have commenced, and you would see transformation along those areas. Mr. Speaker, and finally, I need to highlight the issue of traffic management in Castries South East. Mr. Speaker, a lot the main roads, if you want to go to Viewfort, whether you pass on the East Coast or on the West Coast, you must pass through Castries South. If you pass on the West Coast, it is winding and narrow. And the children who are leaving school in Lacqua, the drains are very deep. If they stay to the side of the drain, they're afraid of going down in these deep drains. Yet the vehicles traversing that road makes it so uncomfortable for our children. Mr. Speaker, I've been to the people responsible for this development, the West Coast Road development, and I've asked that sidewalks and traffic management system for making it safe for pedestrians be included in the design. They said that they never had it on. And I'm happy that they're considering it. So I expect to see sidewalks from the school to the main community of Lacqua and in the other direction in the new design for this development. Also, I am happy that the Ministry of Infrastructure have agreed to put speed bumps in certain parts of Castries South. The Trapito SDA Church, the Otsa Pentecostal Church, Mr. Speaker, and the pastor reminded me some time ago that a vehicle took a member who just left church and took him almost 14 feet in the air. The speed at which vehicles pass it through these communities. And I'm told by the people in Transport Division that it cannot be done, the speed at which vehicle. Mr. Speaker, we are putting people first and their lives are first. And in Castries South, we will ensure that all the safety measures are taken to ensure that our people are protected and reduce the incidence of the sort of fatalities as it relates to vehicular accidents. Mr. Speaker, at this time I would like to thank my colleagues. They have provided me with all of the support. I can say that I feel very comfortable and more than comfortable in this cabinet. Mr. Speaker, when you meet in persons for the first time, even after you participate, but the opportunity to sit next to Honorable Emma Hippolyte, the opportunity to sit next to the member from Central Castries, honestly, it has been a pleasure. It has been tremendous. And I could tell you, Mr. Speaker, with every Monday that we pray, and every time that we meet, I could see the goodness of God piercing through, not just in this room of Parliament, but through the skies radiating on every St. Lucian that has voted for us. Mr. Speaker, I can assure St. Lucians that we in this cabinet, time may not be on our side because God is in charge of time. But the time is allotted for us will be a blessing to the people of St. Lucia, and those in the diaspora will sing the praises, not of just this Prime Minister who was led, but for the many St. Lucians who would have joined us and to uphold his hands as he moves us to a safe harbor in the time that approaches. Thank you very much, colleagues. May God bless us.
The member for Grosley.
South that. Have a look.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I feel very humble and I feel extremely emotional as I rise to make my first contribution on behalf of the people of Grosley to a budget debate. As such, Mr. Deputy Speaker, please grant me leave as I thank those who are responsible for me being here and those who work tirelessly to ensure this remarkable victory on July 26, 2021. Mr. Deputy Speaker, let me thank the Almighty God who has blessed me with the desire, the ambition and temperament to represent the people of Grosley. While I thank the Most High, permit me, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to thank my mom, Caroline Kazemi, who straightened me up from a little boy. Mr. Deputy Speaker, she was a vendor and a cleaner. Mr. Deputy Speaker, she was a single parent of 5 children, none of which are criminals. Mr. Speaker, I want to also thank my grandmother, Florence Kazemi, and the entire Kazemi Hyacinth family, who ensured that I stayed on the straight and narrow. Mr. Speaker, I also want to take this moment to thank my father, Mr. Stephen Gustav, better known as Webby, who never missed a football game. Mr. Speaker, a welder, a drummer, and a DJ. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the entire Gustav Charles family that played their part in ensuring I remained humble through it all. Mr. Speaker, the St. Rose family, including the Nelsons, Merlin Nelson, the Lacombe family from Moshi, the Jones Cherry family from Ivemita, the Josephs, the Etiennes, the Augustine family in Lafayette, and the many other relatives that came out and said, this is the young man we can trust. To them I say thank you. Mr. Speaker, please allow me leave to send condolences to Lucia Norby Joseph for the passing of his mother. She was my aunt. May she rest in peace. Mr. Speaker, let me also thank all the voters in Grosley on both sides of the aisle. Because with their support through it all, we will make Grosley better. Mr. Speaker, let me thank the members of the SLP Women's Organization for their unwavering support for me before and during these trying times. The women, they moved mountains, and for this reason, I can never leave them behind. Mr. Speaker, the youth group BIM, Nicola Dovine and the crew, they played a massive role in this victory. I also thank the members of the constituency branch, the executive of the party, and our now Honorable Prime Minister, who, while many wavered and lacked confidence, stuck with the young man they call Baby from Grosley. Mr. Speaker, this budget that we're debating today represents the largest investment in the actual people of this great nation. After having 5+ years of a government who just seemed preoccupied with the glamour and the glitter of their own interests, we see a government that is seeking to be strategic. We see a government that is seeking to be pragmatic. And most of all, we are now seeing a government that is seeking to be honest with the people of St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, let me first dive into the budget under the Ministry of Youth Development and Sports. When we look at the estimates for the ministry, we see recurrent expenditure of $7,146,400, capital expenditure $2,160,000, for a total of $9,756,400. While this may appear to be a small amount for 60% of our population, we are indeed ready to ensure that the monies allocated to the national lotteries is used towards the development of the people of St. Lucia. And you will not see a week before election $300,000 being spent on medals when there is no school sports in the country. Mr. Speaker, I am very humbled by the opportunities presented to this government to provide better for the youth of this nation. Mr. Speaker, having a government who does not play just lip service to the young people is very important. And so on page 596 under grants and contribution, you will see we moved away from $42,000 being presented to the NYC during the 2021-2022 budget to $52,000 for the financial year 2022 to 2023. While this is not a gigantic amount, but it's a step in the right direction, it is a move that says we have confidence in the young people that they can take $10,000 and turn it into $100,000 for the furtherance of the development of the country. And Mr. Speaker, for years we've seen governments and persons from generations ahead attempt to tell young people what music they should like, how they should arrange their denary segment, what programs they should follow. And Mr. Speaker, with this Ministry of Youth Development and Sports, it will be bottom up and not top down. And so we have engaged young people, and through the 758 Youth Connect, we'll be having a television and online platform for young people to express themselves about the development of this country. And I am pleased that the Honorable Prime Minister was the first guest on this platform. And Mr. Speaker, we'll continue to develop avenues for young people to speak about what affects them. Mr. Speaker, on page 529, the Youth Service Corps, this is a critical aspect of what we will do, what we have done under the Ministry of Youth Development and Sports. This is because for years we've seen young people graduating from secondary school, graduating from Sir Arthur Lewis, and then trying to enter into the work world, and they are being told they have no work experience. Mr. Speaker, under the Youth Service Corps, we will be allowing these individuals to find some form of employment throughout the government agencies so they can gain the experience needed as they move on in their life. Mr. Speaker, on page 527, you will note that the Ministry of Youth Development and Sports has set aside $4,000 towards the consultancy services and commission. Mr. Speaker, during this financial year, you will hear about Skilled 758. Mr. Speaker, a platform that allows our young people who are sitting on the blocks to get up, create a resume, a CV, evaluate their lives, and really decide what they want to become. A platform that would allow them to put those CVs on that platform for the rest of St. Lucia to see. And Mr. Speaker, we know sometimes we at home, we have a plumbing issue. And at that time, our plumber perhaps is not on island. On this platform, we could go and we can geolocate the individuals that have placed their resumes and find one next to us to provide that service. And Mr. Speaker, this is how you start to give young people opportunities. And from that platform, Mr. Speaker, the vision is to take that information and see how we can further provide training for these young individuals, because they will be exposed to the OECS, the West Indies, and indeed the world for opportunities. This is the direction we are going to, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Department of Sports has really taken a hit as a result of COVID-19. We as a ministry know and understand that sport is an important tool to ensure that we deal with the scourge of crime. Mr. Speaker, anybody who has studied sports sociology would let you know, would tell you that there are some sporting events that really builds discipline and character in the individual. And so in this year's budget, you will see increases in allocations of those sporting disciplines. This is because we have to be targeted and strategic about how we deal with the scourge of crime in our communities. And so those sporting activities that we realize will provide the discipline our young people need, we are investing a little more. So on page 597 under grants and contribution, you will see last year, $0 allocated to the Karate Do Federation St. Lucia. And that this government will contribute $3,500 for them to start their program around this island. In fiscal year 2021-2022, we saw only $500 allocated by the previous administration to the St. Lucia Dojo Association. Mr. Speaker, under this administration, we are contributing $3,500 to get their programs going. Mr. Speaker, the St. Lucia Sambo Federation, you only know the names? It's the Sambo Federation, $0 allocated to this organization for years. And we need to teach discipline, and that is the bedrock of these organizations. $3,500 to jumpstart their activities. Mr. Speaker, Taekwondo Federation, $3,500. And Mr. Speaker, the thinking is that young people will be promoting self-defense, conflict resolution that does not require them picking up a gun. This is where we are going, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Boxing Association, an association that has gone to the Bordelais Correctional Facility, an association that goes to the Boys Training Center, an association that preaches discipline, Mr. Speaker, we are also increasing their subvention to $7,500, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in this financial year, the Ministry of Sports will endeavor to continue the legacy of establishing world-class facilities that can be used by St. Lucians, the region, and indeed the world. Mr. Speaker, under the previous St. Lucia Labour Party, under the member for Vieux Fort South, we saw the establishment of the George Odlum Stadium in Vieux Fort. Under the SLP government, later on, we saw the establishment of the Procedural cricket ground, then named the Darren Sammy cricket grounds. Mr. Speaker, these world-class venues before what erupted at Vieux Fort were the envy of the rest of the region. And today, the Darren Sammy cricket grounds, in terms of the pitch, continues to be the envy. It continues to be an avenue for sports tourism, where we can broadcast St. Lucia and expose the beauty of this simply beautiful island. And so, Mr. Speaker, remember having a conversation with a member from Castries North who said to me, since the 1980s, there's been talk of a national aquatic center in St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, this government of the St. Lucia Labour Party will be building state-of-the-art national aquatic center this budget. And Mr. Speaker, during the policy debate, we will get into the ins and outs of what I found when we came into this government. Stay tuned. Stay tuned. Mr. Speaker, there are many communities that were absolutely ignored over the last 5 years. Mr. Speaker, when you look at a community like Ciceron, that we continue to speak about the social ills in this community. We continue to speak about the need for proper programming in this community. And you heard the member for Castries South say that he was going to find the funds to light up that community, because he, as a former PS, understands that when you light up a facility, it gives you the opportunity to have programs beyond the daytime. He understands that it is at night most of the criminal elements read ahead. He understands that lights were needed in that community. And Mr. Speaker, when he invited me to walk on that surface, I was appalled. Not because I am used to the beauty of Darren Sammy, but it was an absolute joke of what that facility was. And so, Mr. Speaker, we are going to do the right thing, Mr. Speaker, and provide a better surface for the people of Cicero in this financial year. Mr. Speaker, Cicero is also, I remember growing up playing volleyball. Of course, my father taught me very early to play volleyball as his sport of choice. And hearing about the Cicero, the Seagulls. Mr. Speaker, when I taught that court, it almost broke my heart because I realized that no attention was given to that facility. And so, Mr. Speaker, during this financial year, the surface and the lights will be dealt with for this community. Mr. Speaker, I was also able to tour the People's Republic of Labrie. And of course, Mr. Speaker,
You saw the president?
the president invited me. And Mr. Speaker, a community that a few years ago got all the way to the finals of Black Art, and if the member for Vieux-Fort South was here, he would say, and they ran into the wall. But this community, Mr. Speaker, with conversations with the young persons, they are ready to ensure they have the development plans together to ensure that Labrie is not a forgotten community as it pertains to sports. Mr. Speaker, for the last 5 years, nothing, zero was done. And so, Mr. Speaker, we are going to ensure proper surface and lighting for that facility in Labrie under this financial year. Mr. Speaker, when I walked into the corridors of the Ministry of Youth Development and Sports, after informing them, we'll talk about Labrie, the policy. After informing them before I officially resigned that I would be back, when I got back into the Ministry of Youth Development and Sports, I saw a document that spoke to shovel-ready programs. And Mr. Speaker, when you look at the history of St. Lucia and sports, you would know, Mr. Speaker. Darren Sammy would tell you he owes his career to the Mindo Philip Park. Laverne Spencer would tell you she owes her career to the Mindo Philip Park. Julian Alfred now will tell you she owes her career to the Mindo Philip Park. And generations would tell you they owe their career, their livelihoods, their households to the Mindo Philip Park. And a shovel-ready project and program does not include the Mindo Philip Park. How do you justify that to the young people of that constituency and St. Lucia? How do you allow a facility that historically has been the breeding ground for all athletes in St. Lucia, how do you justify to them that this area was not shovel-ready? And so, Mr. Speaker, we learned after 5 years that there was a Belrose doctrine that ensured that no matter how we knew that this area needed intervention, that $0 would be pumped into that area. And so I invite the entire cabinet of ministers, including those on the opposite side, all of St. Lucia, to take a walk with me through the Mindo Philip Park. If you have any Masha grounds, if you have any love and compassion for humanity, not for politics, labor, or flubber, if you have any compassion for the development of your nation, you would feel the hurt and despair of the sportsmen and women in that community. And so, Mr. Speaker, with the national lotteries, we are going to do all that we can to bring the Mindo Philip Park back to where it belongs in St. Lucian sports history. Mr. Speaker, you'll also see that the $2 million allocated will see the lighting and, of course, the attention given to Vieux-Fort North. Mr. Speaker, I came in this honorable house and I spoke about Naomi London and the exploits and the field next to her home where she was raised because of who these people voted for has been given zero attention. Mr. Speaker, I visited her family, and with that visit, it was explained to me that she leaves home and has to go to View Fort to train and come back. And Mr. Speaker, the field is literally less than 100 meters from her home, in deplorable condition. And Mr. Speaker, I can finally say that under this Ministry of Youth Development and Sports, that we are going to intervene and ensure we have proper lighting and a proper surface in Bellevue Viewport. Dennery, a community that for years it was given a lot of attention as it pertains to sports, and I will hasten to say, this community is in love with sports. This community embodies what it means to be a fan of sports. When you go and watch football there, I've watched Grosley play against Dennery and feel afraid. Feel like I need to know where my exit has to be, because Grosley is winning. And Mr. Speaker, this community has produced some of the best footballers, some of the best cricketers in Ireland. And when I toured the sporting facility 2 weeks ago, we really saw the need for intervention on the Dennery cricket field. And so during this budget, we will provide that intervention for the people of Dennery. Mr. Speaker, while I paid attention to the developments of this country over the last 5+ years, I heard of a possible Madison Square Garden being developed right in my constituency of Bois-de-Vache. Mr. Speaker, I thought I grew up playing basketball and volleyball right at the VG complex. And again, I would welcome anybody to tour that facility with me. In Central Castries, a community, a facility that has served the best volleyballers, netballers in St. Lucia, the lights in deplorable condition. And so under this budget year, we are going to change, and we've started the process of changing the lights into LED lights at the VG Sports Complex. And so the member for Central Castries, can continue to gloat about all his developments in that community. Mr. Speaker, we'll have a lot to discuss during the policy debate, including the intervention by the National Insurance Corporation. You heard the member for Castries South make mention of the outdoor gyms that are needed in this country to deal with the scourge of non-communicable diseases. And so this financial year we'll partner with all entities needed to ensure outdoor gyms are placed in all communities. We have a few. One is earmarked for VG that we are going to do shortly after this sitting. We have earmarked one for Grosley. And I will say, because we already have an outdoor gym at the Boseju Darren Sami, I have instructed the Ministry of Youth Development and Sports to place that outdoor gym in View Fort. Because I believe we need to spread our resources as much as possible. And so View Fort will have the benefit of an outdoor gym. Soufrière will have the benefit of an outdoor gym. Castries South has the benefit of one. And of course, Leclerc. And the idea is to continue to work with the NIC and other agencies to provide as many as possible. And the Ministry of Youth Development and Sport will provide the actual coaching and programming to ensure we deal with all these issues. Now, Mr. Speaker, let me move towards the people of Grosley and what this budget has for them. I am very, very excited. Take a seat. I drink water and mind my business. The people of Grosley's business. Mr. Speaker, I am extremely excited about how this budget will aid in the development of my constituency. Mr. Speaker, under economic development, we see a street lighting, and that should be infrastructure, lighting replacement project. Mr. Speaker, this is one heading that is of extreme importance. And I'm happy that there is no Procedural letter involved in this program today. Mr. Speaker, this is one program that, as MP for Groseley, I take extremely seriously. The security of the people of Groseley, the economic hub, the financial hub of this country, is of extreme importance to me. And so when we speak about street lighting, it's almost trivialized in some quarters. It's almost placed on a back burner. But Mr. Speaker, because of the size of the constituency and the homes spread across the constituency, constituents march throughout the doors, and my attaché is here with me today, she can tell you, and they complain and beg for street lights. And those who have street lights, they complain about the fact that they are not bright enough. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to street lighting, we do not care if you are Labour, if you are Flabo, if you are LPM or no PM. We are going to ensure we give you the attention you need because your life is at stake. And so, Mr. Speaker, I'm very excited about the $4 million allocated for this project. And I hope very, very soon I'll be marching down the Ministry of Infrastructure after this budget to provide this long list of close to 150 lights spread throughout Groseley. If I get 50 for now, Mr. Prime Minister, I'll be happy. But I'm going with the entire list because every single one of these individuals, their lives are at stake. And in this hard guava season, and of course, if you do any analysis of Groseley, burglaries are at the highest. You will understand why me as MP must march towards the Ministry of Infrastructure for those lights. And Mr. Speaker, while I speak about safety and security, I am indeed excited about the Groseley police station. And anybody who knows me would know that from day one, upon assuming this office, I have been speaking about a special place for the Northern Division of the Royal St. Lucia Police Force. And I am happy that I have a Prime Minister who understands how important this is for the most populous constituency in St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, I think it was on Monday last week, or was it this week, the press secretary to the Prime Minister brought an article to me with the former member for Groseley, myself in the middle, and another individual, and the heading was a conversation on crime. And Mr. Speaker, I had to shake my head because there are certain individuals who have no moral authority to speak on these issues. No moral authority. There were proposals from NIPRO for the Groseley police station for the last 5 years. They were cast aside because there was no financial interest for those who were involved. 2016.
The bypass road as well.
Mr. Speaker, when I heard this individual speak about, doing more for the business sector of Groseley, I just remembered briefly, I went to Dermo and had a conversation with Lopo. And I mean, what we had for 5 years in Groseley was ridiculous. I mean, there was no moral compass to speak from when dealing with crime in this constituency. And all of a sudden, great discussion. But under this MP for Groseley and this government, we are going to establish a Groseley police station. We are going to continue to provide support for this police in the best way possible for them. And Mr. Speaker, we saw a budget with $0 for training of police. $0. And it's this government that has finally decided that this is important and important to the financial sector of this population in Groseley. And so, Mr. Speaker, I marvel sometimes at what I read and what I see. And as a young man, I have no choice but to smile because my people understand what genuine love and affection and care for their well-being truly is, and they showed it on July 26, 2021. Mr. Speaker, under the Ministry of Physical Planning and Urban Renewal, land acquisition, I see $4 million allocated. And of course, we have situations in the communities of Montsepa, the communities of Corinth, that from conversations with the senior minister, we continue to plead and we continue to negotiate with the owners of that land, because squatting has been an issue that is time immemorial. It's been here. And as the member for Castries South said, ownership of a small piece of the pie in St. Lucia is important. And I can say to these people of Montsepa and Corinth that we are working assiduously to ensure that they can own the land. Mr. Speaker, we also have a situation in the communities of Labon and the communities of Deramo that a month before the election, after disregarding Proud, which was established by the member for Viewfort South, after totally aborting the Proud program, all of a sudden the residents of Labon and Deramo were called into a meeting. They were given the option of them paying for their own surveys and then being granted their spots. Mr. Speaker, the persons from Labon, and if anybody knows anything about Labon, here's the member for Castries South who was a campaign manager at one point in Grosley, would tell you that almost 95% of that population is UWP. And Mr. Speaker, these persons said no, they are not paying for that survey because the St. Lucia Labour Party had a Proud program where government surveyed and government gave you a price for that land. And so, Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Prime Minister visited that community, and I can say to them that under this allocation, we'll ensure we do what's right for the people of Labon and Deramo. Mr. Speaker, under Ministry of Finance, unleashing the blue economy, we see an allocation of $3.8 million. And I'm excited about that for the people of Grosley Town and, of course, Labon. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy that persons like Kurt Phillip, Urban Augustine, Kirby Lewis, they can institute their programs along the shores of Grosley to further develop the blue economy. Mr. Speaker, under this allocation, we are hoping to ensure that we have classes at the HRDC and classes for persons who are interested in jobs in this blue economy. Classes instituted on sail repairs, boat repairs, yacht maintenance, construction and maintenance of fishing nets. Mr. Speaker, this will give these young people the opportunity to delve into an area of their own personal interest. And so I'm excited about that. Mr. Speaker, under the blue economy, from day one as MP, we have been working assiduously on the demarcation exercise along the coastline. Mr. Speaker, you would recall a few years ago, we had two major accidents with users of vessels and swimmers, where persons actually lost their lives. And because of this, Mr. Speaker, I as MP have to ensure that we can clearly demarcate where swimming is allowed, where vessels are allowed, jet skis, and where fishing is allowed. And so this exercise, Mr. Speaker, in collaboration with SLASPA, will be undertaken during this financial year. Mr. Speaker, moorings will be placed along our seashores. This will ensure that we provide economic activities for the people of Grosley. I've been told that rental of moorings for yachts could exceed 80 US a day. And Mr. Speaker, this is revenue that we could use to further develop our shorelines and the constituency of Grosley. And I'm excited about this. Mr. Speaker, the construction of the Grosley jetty, I am very happy that the member for Castries South ensured, promised, made sure, he mentioned that Grosley jetty will be fixed during this financial year. In fact, he said next month. I'm very happy because the people of Grosley benefit from this jetty. when we have boats who can come away from the different parts of St. Lucia, dock here, right in Grosley, and service and eat in our constituency, the restaurants, the bars, and really enjoy what it is to be Jean Grosley, we have to ensure that this jetty is up and running. And so from day one, he will confess to you weekly, I'm begging and I'm asking, but he said to me, we are getting it done, and so I'm happy today. Mr. Speaker, for the first time in many years, the people of Grosley will experience a gourmet race. This exciting economic activity that I'm proud to say the member for Soufrière ensured that was held in Grosley. And I remember growing up that boats would race from Martinique to St. Lucia through Bay Street, Grosley. And we're talking about 400 or 500 persons from Martinique in Airbnbs we have established right now through community tourism, at restaurants, enjoying Grosley nightlife right in the community. And so, Mr. Speaker, under this government, this will be brought back to the people of Grosley. Mr. Speaker, the construction of the beachfront park, commonly called Simple Park. Some people call it Simple Park. We'll have to find a name for it. Mr. Speaker, we know in Grosley the history of how this thing came about. I've seen the plans that are actually there for the creation of this park. DCA approval, finally done, because we saw buildings coming up without DCA approval. And Mr. Speaker, this really has to stop. The Tea Village opposite the bank of St. Lucia had 0 DCA approval. And it's now up to me as the MP for Grosley to regularize what happens in this area. And as a young man, disappointing, just disappointing. And so, Mr. Speaker, we will see very soon the tendering process has gone through for the creation of this park in Grosley along Pigeon Island Beach. Mr. Speaker, I will inform my colleagues that the funding for a beach football field at Pigeon Point, Grosley, and Sandy Beach in Viewfort will be done in collaboration with the St. Lucia Football Association. Of course, for those of you who followed sports development in St. Lucia, you'd realize every final in football seemed to include Viewfort South and Grosley at some point. I can boast and say that Grosley are the defending champions of the Island Cup, while Viewfort South are the 4-time defending champions of Black Art football. And so these communities have shown their ability to maintain, to develop, and to continue to grow football. And so I'm happy to announce that in conversation with the president of the SLFA, that these are 2 projects that we can institute in this financial year. St. Lucia a few years ago won a Commonwealth gold medal in beach football. Gold medal. And there was no thrust to develop beach football along this pristine and beautiful island. That for me is just marveling. And so we are going to ensure that this is done during this financial year. Mr. Speaker, under the Ministry of Housing, National Housing Repair Program, we see an allocation of $10 million. Mr. Speaker, as MP for Grosley, I find myself often having to explain the reality of Grosley and its population. Mr. Speaker, I must say in this honorable house that Grosley is not just what you see along the highway when you look left and right, where you see the nice houses, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the inner communities, we see a lot of houses that need attention. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister visited some of our communities during the last election campaign. Mr. Speaker, ask him about some of the houses he saw in Grosley. Mr. Speaker, the member for Castries South, in another life, was part of a campaign in Grosley. Ask him about some of the inner communities in Grosley. Mr. Speaker, the member for Miku North, he lived in Casablanca, Grosley for years, and we welcome him. Ask him about the housing conditions in Grosley. Mr. Speaker, the member for Labrie, he was on the ground during the Grosley campaign. He came into some of the communities. Ask him about that situation. A lot of persons come in Grosley, some of them for opportunities, and they take any any avenue they can to keep themselves in Grosley. But Mr. Speaker, when you come to places like Marisil, a place they call Indafon, Mr. Speaker, when you go to Black and White, Bonnet, that is just behind the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Marisil, when you go to Labon, Deramo, Ravin Makok, Cletus Village, the Diwidu, Montsepa, Vieux-Siqui, Tidofer, Rivière-Mita, Casaba, Lower Beauséjour. When you drive to Beauséjour, you will not be inclined to look left or right when you just leave the Grosley the Sports Academy. But right in those communities are completely plywood houses. Mr. Speaker, Degazon, Norbert, Magretout, Larifouet, dominated, predominantly wooden houses. So, Mr. Speaker, I will even delve a bit further. Mr. Speaker, so far we've had more than 400 requests and applications, some of which are at the office, some of which are on my phone for housing assistance. Mr. Speaker, right now we are only able to do 14. When you look at the condition of those houses, it really hurts you when you see you don't have the amount needed for these houses. But we have more than 400. Mr. Speaker, Grosley during the last census, I think that was 2010, had almost 12,000 houses. To put this in context, I'm sorry, my brother, but I have to use Denry South. Denry South has about 2,500. You can check the census. That was back then. Here is the reality of Grosley that we are faced with. About 60% of the households in Grosley are wall. And we have about 35 to 48% with a combination or strictly wooden houses in Grosley. Mr. Speaker, if you do 40% of 12,000 households, this is still 4,800 plywood houses in the constituency. This is the reality of Grosley, 4,800. So this is double the amount of houses in the Denry South. And so I often have to plead the case for Grosley. And so I will continue to plead the case for Grosley to continue to get more funds for this housing repair program. We welcome it, we appreciate it, and we have to use it. Mr. Speaker, under the Ministry of Equity, we see $2 million allocated for the rehabilitation of HRDCs. Mr. Speaker, in the community of Grand Riviere, it is sad that human resource development centers have been moved from place to place on a rental basis. When this government comes in, they rent an apartment somewhere. When this one comes in, another place is rented. Now they're using the Nazarene Church as an area for persons who do not have computers to go in and get some work done. Mr. Speaker, after so many years, and Grand Riviere being who they are as a people, being committed as a people to a particular style of government, was given no attention over the last 5 years. Mr. Speaker, we certainly will be tapping into as many allocations as we can. We would have to use some funds from CDP, but Grand Riviere is finally receiving a human resource development center in that community. Mr. Speaker, in Grosley, the HRDC, whereas outside it may seem complete, there are still so many teething issues. And so, Mr. Speaker, we've seen that we need to move out of the Grosley Community Center where you have the post office and move into the HRDC on the road so that we can have this community center for the development of sports, for the strengthening of our athletes, and to eventually build some form of shelter for persons who are coming to see the games. And so, Mr. Speaker, we'll continue to work towards that. Mr. Speaker, while I'm speaking about CDP, a brilliant idea, Venus Sherry in Grosley, a peanut butter pantry for the people of Grosley that cannot afford breakfast before they go to school. Under a CDP allocation will definitely provide the avenue and hope for our young people to get at least something nutritional before they get to school. Very important. Mr. Speaker, under the development of the creative industries, we see an increased allocation from $250,000 to $750,000 under this government. This, as a young man, proves to me that this government understands young people. Because with the creative industry, you deal with the issues of crime and all other social ills. When you give persons opportunities to tap into financing for their creative ideas, this is the direction we need to move. And so we'll be trying our best to see how those individuals in the Grand Riviere, the Rivière community who have so many ideas and creative ideas can be dealt with. Mr. Speaker, under the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries, we see $1.1 million for repairs of fisheries. And I was very happy that the member for Dennery South took the opportunity to visit the Grosley Fishing Complex and note the inadequacies of that area. We've seen rust and more rust on that building. And of course, before the hurricane season, you'd never know when this roof is going to fly out. And so I'm certainly hoping that we can tap into this to ensure...
Member for Grosley, you have 15 minutes left.
Jesus Christ. Mr. Speaker, I'll soldier on. Mr. Speaker, we're certainly hoping that we can get the assistance needed for the Grosley Fishing Complex. And while I'm on agriculture and fisheries, the member for Dennery South also visited the largest pig farm in St. Lucia. And when people say Grosley don't have farmers, the largest pig farm in St. Lucia is in Badouage, Grosley. And he was able to spend some time, and I see the smile on the member for Soufrière, because she was one of those championing the cause of these farmers. And of course, he visited, took notes, and we're certainly hoping for intervention. Mr. Speaker, we've seen under the same heading, enhancing honey and CMOS production. I see an allocation of $300,000. This is a critical sector, burgeoning sector. And you have places like Labon, with a wealth of land there. Mr. Speaker, we hope that we would be able to, in collaboration with the former Minister of Agriculture, we've had conversations, and Sir George, I call him Sir George, Sir Calix George, we've had conversations about honey production in the community of Labon, and so we'll continue to soldier on with this. Mr. Speaker, for CMOS production, we've seen CMOS really change lives in this nation. And we have people like Nicholas Popper, Joseph, Jared from Grosley, Grady, other CMOS farmers, they could benefit from this line item, and we certainly hope we can tap into that. Mr. Speaker, under the Ministry of Infrastructure, for road repairs, Mr. Speaker, the Sir Julian Hunt Highway, or commonly known as the Castries Grosley Highway. Mr. Speaker, we've had a number of issues over the years as it pertains to traffic in Grosley. And so, Mr. Speaker, I am happy that the member for Castries North, along with the Prime Minister, have re-engaged the Kuwaiti government to finally do something about the Castries Grosley Highway. Mr. Speaker, during the break yesterday, I had the pleasure for the first time of speaking with the member for Miku South. And Mr. Speaker, he asked me, of course, we understood that I am his MP. He asked me, what are we doing about the Rodney Bay Road? And Mr. Speaker, after all what has happened, I would have thought by now that there was an understanding that there were lapses and infelicities, to use the member for Vieux-Fort South term, to say the least, when it came to that project. But Mr. Speaker, he still persisted in defending the project. And Mr. Speaker, he just does not listen. Mr. Speaker, if the first roundabout was supposed to be next to MGI, and then it was moved by the U.S. Navy sign, and then it was moved to by Key Largo, it tells me as a young person that something was wrong from from jump in terms of the design, the consultation, and everything with this road, and it was never designed. But Mr. Speaker, you would think that by now there would be an acceptance of that, so we can move forward. But he just does not listen, Mr. Speaker. And I can tell the people of Rodney Bay that have gone through so much with flooding because of the way the sidewalk was built, that under this St. Lucia Labour Party, we hear them and we are going to deal with this road in the best, most efficient and strategic, professional manner that we can. And so, Mr. Speaker, I'm excited for this Castries Grosley Highway, and it will be named the Sir Julian R. Hunt Highway when we celebrate Grosley Day come August. Mr. Speaker, let me quickly move to developments in sports in Grosley. The Grosley playing field, Mr. Speaker. For years, we've had major competitions on Grosley playing field with no space for fans. And so, Mr. Speaker, the plans, the ambition is to ensure that we have a seated area for the Grosley playing field during this financial year. Mr. Speaker, the Grosley court, we have to ensure that we give it more attention. The Moshi playing field, they've been pleading, begging for lights, begging. And again, because of the size of this constituency, they have every justification to ask for lights. The size of the Moshi area that we will eventually name Central Grosley is bigger than Castries North and Castries Central put together. And so when these individuals are not afforded lights for the development program, it's really criminal. And so the engagement is there to ensure that Moshi will get lights. The Graniver Court, Mr. Speaker, will deal with that in the policy. The Graniver playing field. Mr. Speaker, I can announce that after 20 years of asking, 20 years, that this government has put lights on the Bonte Court, Mr. Speaker. And if you speak to these individuals, they will tell you how much and how disenfranchised they felt from not having lights, Mr. Speaker. Labon, as a community, again, where they are, there's need for a court and, of course, an HRDC. And so, because of the topography, we must explore whether or not the court is on top and the HRDC at the bottom, but we have engaged a number of persons in that community. Mr. Speaker, you'll hear me speak about Labon every day of my life. This is because, Mr. Speaker, after 43 years of independence, only one St. Lucia Labour Party candidate has ever won the community of Labon, and I'm proud of that, Mr. Speaker. Proud of that. Mr. Speaker, the current playing field lights, Mr. Speaker, that is another area where we see development of all sporting individuals come through Corinth. And finally, in this financial year, they will be given the lights, Mr. Speaker. We will see further investment in the Northern Cluster Grassroots Cricket Program, the program that has produced the likes of Kimani Melius, Kiana Joseph, and many more. We will see an expansion of this program into the Graniver community. Mr. Speaker, village tourism, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I must ensure that St. Lucia and the rest of the world understands that the first village/community tourism project in this nation was a Grosley Friday night. Mr. Speaker, the first ever community tourism initiative was the Grosley Friday night. Mr. Speaker, the Grosley Friday night came about from the days when there were hotels and rooms available for persons from other countries. And one man, by a place called the German's Bar, put a speaker out. And just by putting that speaker out by the German's Bar, the tourists came there on Friday night. And then he decided to fry some floats and barbecue some chicken, make some fish. And Grosley Friday night mushroomed into what it is today. Mr. Speaker, the vendors in Grosley are persons, are ordinary St. Lucians. They've seen the influx of people in Rodney Bay. They've seen the influx of people in the restaurants and bars in Grosley. And they sit idly by why they cannot provide for their family. And so, Mr. Speaker, not only will I continue to make a pitch to the member for Castries South for an injection in developing Grocery Friday night, but Mr. Speaker, I have to lobby on these vendors for the reintroduction of Grocery Friday night, Mr. Speaker, in a bigger and better way, Mr. Speaker. Passionate about the vendors because I know and I hear their plight daily. Mr. Speaker, under community tourism, Mr. Speaker, partnership with the National Trust for tours to the community of Labon, the first Amerindian settlements, Mr. Speaker, the remains are still in the community, and so we are going to put together a nice community tourism initiative to get tourists into that community, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, eco-agro-tourism in Maki Estate with Calix George Sr., another initiative that could bring tourists into the communities and enjoy sweet St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we won't have Moshi Music Acreole this year, but with the announcement made by the member for Castries South, Mr. Speaker, Moshi Music Acreole, established by the member for Soufre, brought everybody to enjoy the essence of Moshi, Secret Band, La Rose, La Marguerite, Mr. Speaker, with John Sherwin in the
you have
school.
5 minutes left to conclude.
Mr. Speaker, we are going to bring it back next year. So, Mr. Speaker, let me once again thank the people of Rosalie for reposing their confidence in me. Let me thank my staff at the constituency office, my attaché, Eva Florton and Vernon Shaw, my secretary, Meander Ajayab, my senior advisors, the former campaign managers, Armstrong Alexis, Roston Taylor, Mr. Mikey Pilgrim, the staff of the Ministry of Youth Development and Sports, my branch leaders, Peter Alexander, Azi as is known, Terence Skinny St. Clair, Kirby Sidney, Sharon Ephraim, Martin Satney, Felix Finister, Rosie Fredris, Axel Philip, Jackie Trim, Dennis Caesar, and also Kenny Hyacinth. Let me say thank you to you. My ace, Clisha Strong, Kalina Jean, you're still there with me. Mr. Speaker, the work has just started. We may not have all the finances in the world to deal with all the individual requests and desires of the largest constituency in St. Lucia. But Mr. Speaker, I ask the people of Grosley to be patient. In me, they have an individual that will work hard to develop this community. Not fulfill individual desires, but develop the community. Mr. Speaker, I may not be able to return all the 48 missed calls I got yesterday while being in this house, and the 20 or so that I had before I stood up. Mr. Speaker, but I need these individuals to know that this young man is working on their behalf. This young man is working on the development of their families. Mr. Speaker, I will continue to work hard for these people because I continue to be committed to their plight. Mr. Speaker, I'm here to serve the people of Grosley, and I'll do so. I thank you.
Member for Castries South.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the House be suspended until 2:30 p.m.
Honorable members, the question is that this House do stand suspended until 2:30 p.m. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Sitting suspended.
Well, as you just heard, the Leader of Government Business has asked for an adjournment until 2:30. In the morning session, we heard from the member for Castries South, the Leader of Government Business. We also heard from the member for Southeast Castries and from the member for Grosley. The member of Castries South, who is also the leader or the member, I should say, for Castries South, the leader of government business in the House, in his introduction, or let's say at the beginning of his address, he called on the member for Castries South, who is also the leader of the opposition, that if he does not speak by this afternoon, he will lose his right to make a contribution to the debate on the estimates of expenditure for the financial year 22-23. This is statement, like I said before, came from the leader of government business, the member for Castries South, Ernest Hilaire. Apparently, the member for Castries, for Miku South, is determining and demanding where and when in the order of speakers that he should speak. Usually the leader of the opposition follows the Prime Minister in a debate. As one who has covered more parliamentary debates as a broadcast journalist, I can tell you that this has been the convention going back to the colonial days, going back as far back as when John Compton was Chief Minister and George F.L. Charles was the opposition leader. We have had opposition leaders, Neville Snack, Julian Hunt, John Compton himself, Alan Louisy, Louis George, Asin James, Marcus Nicholas, Kenny Anthony, and of late Philip J. Pierre, who have all followed that convention, or what was agreed upon in terms of how and the order of speakers. I can recall that there was a problem with the order of speakers back in 1984 when then member for Castries East, Romanus Lancico, refused to speak when he was scheduled to because he wanted to speak in prime time, which was about this time, lunchtime. And this infuriated then Prime Minister Sir John Compton then, who called for an adjournment to the proceedings and cautioned Mr. Lancico on following the convention, and Lancico acquiesced. So we have a problem here as to whether the leader of the opposition will speak at the time he is supposed to speak or forfeit the privilege of making a contribution to this, the estimates of expenditure for the fiscal year 1922, or 2022, I beg your pardon, 23. Lisa Joseph will sum up before we close the broadcast until 2:30.
Thank you so much, Vincent Springer. Certainly we did hear from the parliamentary representatives for the morning in the persons of Honorable Dr. Ernest Hilaire. We did hear from Honorable Joachim Henry as well as Honorable Kenson Casme. Let's just start with Honorable Kenson Casme there, giving us a very full view and really elaborating on the government's commitment to the development of youth development, the development of sports in the country, and as a whole, he spoke to the 758 Connect program. And that program really started during COVID-19 to be able to give young people the ability to discuss what they were feeling, some of the pressures that they were going through. And that program mushroomed and created such an expanded network, and that the Ministry of Youth Development and Sports has now decided to dive a little deeper into that and take advantage of the avenues that 758 Connect has presented. Within there is a program of Skilled 758, where young people now, it's a sort of registry where young people can have themselves registered, where they're providing various trades and skills so that the wider community is aware of who they are and what it is that they do and provide. The minister quite excitedly spoke to being providing subventions, and for the first time Taekwondo Federation will be receiving the Sambo Federation as well, and that's a form of martial arts if I'm not mistaken, and he is seeing that as being a very critical avenue to addressing the overall crime problem that we're having, really engaging the energies of young people and sending them onto a positive footing. The same is being done for the Boxing Association. They're receiving some $7,500. The two previous federations receiving some $3,500 for the first time. The National Aquatic Center, something that has been spoken about for quite some time, that the minister has indicated will definitely be getting off the ground. The whole program within the Ministry of Equity, Honorable Joachim Henry, speaking to its funding to the tune of some $2.7 million, and within that program it really provides assistance to the most vulnerable in our society. Key for the ministry that the minister indicated is being able to graduate people from some of these assistance programs, really to empower them, for them to be able to have more of a sustainable livelihood and being able to care for themselves and their families. Some $1.3 million has been allocated for housing assistance, which is of an absolute critical need in the country. We did hear from Honorable Dr. Ernest Hilaire, and speaking extensively on the matters of tourism, more specifically community tourism being seen as the vehicle through which that the tourism industry really trickles down to the ordinary St. Lucian. It is also a way of building the communities, improving on the infrastructure in the various communities across the island, as well as building capacity within those communities. Absolutely important, the minister pointed out, is for the people of St. Lucia to really embrace tourism in its totality, and that would mean understanding what the business of tourism is about. It is beyond just hotels, and so the minister did indicate that there's going to be an extensive program, a sort of a public awareness campaign to really have St. Lucians understand the business of tourism, and by so doing they too can find where their space is in that business of tourism. And creative industries as well. The minister did say that it is an economic driver, and some $7.6 million overall to the Ministry of Tourism, Creative Industries, Information. Some $750,000 going towards the Creative Industries program, and within there containing a small grants program, one that would allow the creatives in the society to not just be the creators, but certainly to see themselves as business individuals as well. And so we're looking to a more extensive or expanded or details on all of those initiatives once the debate on the appropriation bill commences later in April. We will see you back here after lunch for the afternoon session on the debate for the estimates of revenue and expenditure for 2022-2023. On behalf of Winston Springer, I'm Lucia Joseph. Join us for the afternoon session.